By the spring of 1945, the war in Western Europe had narrowed to one final barrier, a river that had shaped German history, strategy, and psychology for generations. The Rhine was not just a geographical obstacle, it was a line of meaning. For Germany, it was the last natural shield before the heart of the country lay exposed. For the Allies, it was the final gate that had to be forced open before the war could truly end. George S. Patton had no intention of waiting for permission to cross it. As Allied forces closed in on the Rhine, plans were already forming for large, deliberate set-piece crossings. Engineers prepared bridges, air forces planned suppression, timetables were cautious, methodical, and politically sensitive. The Rhine was expected to be crossed with ceremony and overwhelming force, in leaving nothing to chance. Patton saw something else. He saw momentum, fragile, fleeting, and easily lost. He understood that the German army was no longer capable of sustained defense, but it was still capable of disruption. Every pause gave the enemy time to regroup, destroy crossings, and reorganize resistance deeper inside Germany. To Patton, waiting was not safety. Waiting was danger. When elements of his Third Army reached the Rhine and discovered intact crossing opportunities, Patton did not hesitate. There were no rehearsed speeches, no formal announcements. Orders moved quickly, quietly, and decisively. Units crossed where they could, when they could, using whatever means were available, boats, pontoons, and improvised ferries, before the enemy fully understood what was happening. This was not recklessness. It was instinct sharpened by experience. Patton's Rhine crossing was not a single dramatic moment, but a cascading event. Once the barrier was breached, movement accelerated immediately. Armor poured across. Infantry followed. Artillery was repositioned almost as soon as it arrived. The river, long treated as a wall, became just another obstacle already behind them. German resistance was fragmented. Some units fought hard, others dissolved. Many simply retreated eastward, knowing the war was no longer about defense, only survival. The psychological impact was as significant as the tactical one. The Rhine had fallen not after weeks of preparation, but through speed and initiative. What was meant to be a final stand became another phase of collapse. German command and control struggled to respond to an enemy that refused to slow down. For Patton, the crossing validated everything he believed about war. That initiative mattered more than symmetry. That hesitation cost more lives than boldness. That momentum, once gained, had to be exploited relentlessly. His Third Army did not stop at the river. It surged into the German interior, overrunning towns, seizing bridges, and capturing formations that no longer had the cohesion to resist effectively. The war shifted from structured resistance to accelerated disintegration. Yet even here, Patton's actions stirred controversy. Some saw brilliance, others saw risk, all saw results. The Rhine crossing became a defining example of Patton's command philosophy. Acting faster than doctrine, pressing forward while others aligned plans, and trusting prepared subordinates to execute without waiting for perfection. It did not end the war by itself, but it ensured the war would end sooner rather than later. The complete history of Patton's Rhine crossing is not just a story of a river crossed. It is the story of how wars end, not with symmetry or ceremony, but with pressure applied at exactly the right moment. It shows how barriers collapse when momentum meets opportunity, and how decisive leadership can turn a geographical line into a historical footnote. This was the final expression of Patton's way of war: forward, relentless, unapologetic. This is the complete history of Patton's Rhine crossing, the moment when the last great barrier fell, and the end of the war rushed forward to meet those already moving toward it. Before we go any further, pause and take note of where you are right now. What kind of space surrounds you? Familiar, temporary, quiet, or full of movement? And what hour has found you here, listening to a river being crossed decades ago? The Rhine marked an ending that came faster than many expected. Let this story unfold at the pace your moment allows. March 1944, Camp Breckinridge, Kentucky. A single lamp burns in the quarters of Lieutenant General George Smith Patton, Jr. The man bent over the maps, spread across his desk, has not slept in 36 hours. His hands, scarred from cavalry training decades earlier, trace lines across the topography of France with the precision of a surgeon. Outside, 250,000 men sleep in barracks, unaware they belong to him now. Yet unaware that the general studying invasion routes by candlelight has spent the last 8 months in a kind of purgatory reserved for men who achieve too much too quickly and then destroy themselves in a moment of weakness. The maps show river crossings, the Rhine, the Seine, the Moselle. Patton has studied riverine warfare since his days at West Point, obsessed with how armies drown trying to cross water under fire. Tonight, he believes he understands something no other American general grasps. The secret is not in the preparation. The secret is in the audacity. 9 months earlier, George Patton stood at the apex of his career. Sicily, August 1943. His 7th Army had stormed across the island with a speed that shocked even German commanders. 66,000 troops, 7,000 vehicles. There's an entire army moving like a mechanized fist, punching through defensive lines that were supposed to hold for weeks. Patton had proven he could command at scale, that his theories about rapid armored warfare were not just classroom fantasies, but operational realities. Then, in a field hospital outside Palermo, he encountered a soldier suffering from what doctors called battle fatigue. The man was shaking, unable to speak coherently, his eyes vacant. Patton saw cowardice. He saw weakness in a moment when the Allied cause demanded strength. He slapped the soldier across the face. Then he did it again at another hospital days later. Within weeks, the incidents became public. Newspaper editorials demanded his removal. Congress debated his fitness for command. General Dwight Eisenhower, Supreme Commander of Allied forces, faced a choice: fire the most aggressive tactical commander in the American Army, or salvage him and face the political consequences. Eisenhower chose salvage, barely. The punishment was calculated humiliation. Patton was removed from public operations for 8 months. While other generals planned the invasion of France, Patton sat in England, a stage prop in an elaborate deception. The Allies wanted German intelligence to believe he would command the main invasion force. So, Patton toured fake military installations, inspected inflatable tanks, and gave speeches to phantom divisions. The Germans, who respected his tactical brilliance more than his own countrymen did at that moment, positioned defensive forces based on where they thought Patton would strike. Meanwhile, the real invasion forces under other commanders prepared for Normandy. For a man whose self-worth was inseparable from martial achievement, the deception duty was psychological torture. He wrote in his diary, December 1943, "I am destined to achieve some great thing. What, I do not know, but the fact is unquestionable. The certainty bordered on delusion, or prophecy. The measure of a military mind can sometimes be taken decades before its defining moment." 1932. The Army War College, Carlisle Barracks, Pennsylvania. Captain Patton stood before a room of senior officers and presented a paper on mechanized warfare that most dismissed as science fiction. He argued that the next war would be won not by defensive fortifications or artillery bombardments, but by rapid armored thrusts that bypassed strong points and collapsed enemy logistics. Tank columns moving faster than defenders could respond, infantry following in trucks rather than marching. The entire operational tempo accelerated beyond what traditional military doctrine considered possible. His audience, men who had fought in the trenches of World War I, found the ideas reckless. War was about careful preparation, overwhelming firepower, and methodical advance. Patton was describing something else entirely: chaos as strategy, speed as weapon. The room was polite but skeptical. 12 years later, the Germans would use exactly these tactics to conquer France in 6 weeks, and Patton would use them to help destroy Germany. His IQ tested at 164, placing him in the 99th percentile of cognitive ability. But intelligence alone does not explain Patton. He was a man possessed by history, and convinced he had lived previous lives as a warrior. He claimed memories of fighting with Alexander the Great, with Napoleon's armies, in the trenches at Verdun, before he was actually born. Whether these were genuine beliefs or elaborate personal mythology, they shaped his self-conception. He saw himself not as a modern officer bound by regulations and political considerations, but as a timeless warrior executing an eternal role. This grandiosity could manifest as brilliance or madness, depending on circumstances. In Sicily, it had looked like brilliance. In the hospital tent, it had looked like madness. Now, in March 1944, handed command of the Third Army, Patton had one final chance to prove which interpretation was correct. The Third Army existed mostly on paper when Patton assumed command. The 250,000 men scattered across training bases in the United States and Britain, 60,000 vehicles that would need to be shipped across the Atlantic, a logistics network that had to move fuel, ammunition, food, and medical supplies across an ocean and then through a combat zone. The organizational challenge was staggering, but Patton thrived on exactly this kind of operational chaos. He immediately began reshaping the Army's culture. Training exercises emphasized speed over caution. Officers who hesitated were replaced. The message was explicit. When the Third Army landed in France, it would not dig trenches and wait for reinforcements. It would attack. It would move faster than the enemy could respond. It would accept casualties in exchange for momentum. This philosophy would horrify more cautious commanders. It would also, in the end, prove devastatingly effective. Eisenhower's private note to Patton, written in January 1944, captures the complexity of their relationship. "George," it read, "you are a fighting man. I need you in Europe, but I need you to remember that you are part of a coalition, part of a larger strategy. Your brilliance in battle is undeniable. Your judgment in other matters is questionable. Prove to me that you can master both, and you will have your chance to make history. Fail, and I will have no choice but to end your career permanently." It was both endorsement and threat. The lifeline was real, but it was also the last one. Patton folded the note and placed it in his personal files. He understood the bargain. One more mistake, and he would finish the war commanding a training base in Kansas. Its success in Europe, however, would vindicate everything. The slapping incident would become a footnote. His theories about modern warfare would become doctrine. His name would endure. But success in Europe meant crossing rivers. The Seine first, then the Moselle, then the Rhine. The Rhine especially, 500 meters wide in places, with currents that could flip assault boats, defended by an enemy fighting for its homeland. Every military academy taught that river crossings under fire were the most dangerous operations an army could attempt. Attackers concentrated in boats became targets. Defenders on high ground could rain artillery on crossing points. Historically, armies lost 30 to 40% of their strength in contested river crossings. Patton had studied every major riverine assault in military history. It had Napoleon crossing the Berezina in 1812, losing 25,000 men in 3 days. Caesar crossing the Rhine in 55 BC, using pontoon bridges that took weeks to construct. Frederick the Great's crossing in 1760, the last successful military crossing of the Rhine under fire before World War II. The pattern was clear. River crossings required massive preparation, overwhelming force, and acceptance of catastrophic casualties, unless there was another way. Late March 1944, the maps in Patton's quarters show something his peers do not yet see. The invasion of France will succeed. The Allies will push inland. Sooner or later, the American army will reach the Rhine. When that moment comes, any traditional military doctrine will demand what British Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery is already planning: a methodical, overwhelming assault with weeks of preparation. Artillery bombardments, engineering preparations, massive force concentration, acceptable casualties measured in the tens of thousands. Patton traces the river with his finger and makes a notation in his private journal. "Speed substitutes for strength," he writes. "Surprise substitutes for numbers. Audacity substitutes for preparation." He does not yet know the exact location where he will test this theory. He does not know the political obstacles he will face, but he knows, with the certainty that has sustained him through 8 months of humiliation, that when the moment comes, he will be ready. History has been preparing him for this. Everything else was rehearsal. Then the lamp burns lower. Outside, a spring rain begins to fall on the barracks of the Third Army. In 5 months, these men will land in France. In 11 months, they will reach the Rhine. In 12 months, George Patton will execute the most audacious river crossing in modern military history, an operation that violates every rule in the book and succeeds precisely because of that violation. But tonight, none of that is certain. Tonight, he is simply a general with a ruined reputation, given one last chance to prove that his vision of warfare is not madness, but prophecy. The maps promise nothing. They only show terrain, rivers, and the distance between here and destiny. Whether that destiny is glory or final disgrace depends entirely on decisions not yet made, battles not yet fought, and an operational plan that does not yet exist except as an intuition in the mind of a man who believes he has lived 1,000 lives before this one. The rain falls, the lamp burns, and somewhere in Germany, on the banks of a river called the Rhine, the ground waits. January 12, 1945. The conference room at British 21st Army Group, headquarters outside Brussels, smells of cigarette smoke and damp wool. Field Marshal Bernard Law Montgomery stands at a map board, pointer in hand, addressing assembled Allied commanders. The map shows the Rhine River, a thick blue line running through the heart of Germany. Montgomery's pointer traces a crossing site near the town of Wesel. His voice carries the clipped precision of a man who has commanded armies since before most American officers wore uniforms. "Oh, gentlemen," he says, "the Rhine represents the final defensive barrier of the Third Reich. Cross it, and Germany is finished. Fail to cross it, and this war extends into 1946 with casualties we cannot afford." The room is silent. Every officer present understands what Montgomery is proposing is not a river crossing, but an industrial operation, a mechanized assault on a scale never before attempted. He calls it Operation Plunder. The plan will require 8 weeks of preparation. The physical reality of the Rhine makes optimism difficult. At the crossing points, military planners are considering the river measures 300 to 500 meters wide. The current flows at 8 miles per hour in winter, fast enough to capsize assault boats if not handled perfectly. The water is cold enough to kill a man through hypothermia in 15 minutes. There are no natural ford sites, no shallow points where infantry can wade across. The eastern bank rises in most places, giving defenders elevation advantage. German military engineers have spent 6 months fortifying this bank. Concrete pillboxes, artillery positions with pre-sighted firing coordinates, machine gun nests covering every likely approach. 27 German divisions have been reorganized specifically to defend the Rhine. These are not the full-strength divisions of 1940, but they are men fighting for their homeland, positioned behind the best natural defensive terrain in Europe. The defensive advantage is overwhelming. Military history offers few encouraging precedents. Napoleon Bonaparte, then perhaps the greatest military mind of the 19th century, attempted to cross the Berzina River in Russia in November 1812. His Grande Armée, retreating from Moscow, reached the river to find bridges destroyed and Russian forces closing in from multiple directions. Napoleon's engineers constructed 2 pontoon bridges under fire. The crossing took 3 days. 25,000 men died, drowned, frozen, or killed by Russian artillery. The crossing saved the remnant of Napoleon's army, but destroyed it as an effective fighting force. Frederick the Great, King of Prussia, successfully crossed the Rhine under fire in 1760 during the 7 Years' War. His crossing required 6 weeks of preparation, positioning artillery on the western bank to suppress defensive fire, and accepting 12,000 casualties. That was the last successful military crossing of the Rhine against armed opposition before World War II. Nearly 200 years had passed without anyone repeating the feat. Montgomery's Operation Plunder reflects this history. His plan calls for 2,000 artillery pieces to bombard the eastern bank for 12 hours before the first assault boat enters the water. 500 tanks will be positioned to provide covering fire. 250,000 men will participate in the initial assault and follow-on waves. Engineering units will construct multiple pontoon bridges simultaneously, each requiring hundreds of tons of equipment and specialized bridging materials. The entire operation will take a minimum of 2 weeks from first crossing to establishing a secure bridgehead large enough to resume offensive operations. Casualty projections, carefully calculated by staff officers using historical models, estimate 15,000 to 25,000 Allied casualties. Montgomery presents these figures without emotion. This is the price of victory. This is what it costs to break through the final barrier. The assembled commanders take notes. No one questions the estimates. Everyone has seen what happens when armies try to cross rivers quickly. The result is always catastrophe. December 1944. A different conference room, this one at Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force. General Dwight Eisenhower sits at the head of a long table, reading Montgomery's preliminary plan for crossing the Rhine. The document is thorough, methodical, and depressing. 8 weeks of preparation means 8 weeks for German forces to strengthen defenses, to relocate reserves, to prepare for exactly the kind of assault Montgomery is planning. Eisenhower sets the document down and looks at his assembled staff. Monty wants to make this crossing a certain success, he says. The price of certainty is time and casualties. I am not sure we can afford either. But what is the alternative? Every general in the room has been trained in the same doctrine, read the same military histories, learned the same lessons. River crossings under fire are catastrophic unless done with overwhelming force and preparation. There is no other way. The meeting adjourns without resolution. Outside, the winter of 1944 settles over Europe, brutal and cold. The strategic stakes extend beyond the river itself. 15 miles east of the Rhine lies the Ruhr Valley, the industrial heartland of Germany. Coal mines, steel foundries, weapons factories, chemical plants. 70% of German war production originates in the Ruhr. Capture it intact, and Germany loses its ability to wage war, destroy it from the air, and the same result follows but with less strategic value to the victors. German military leadership understands this calculus perfectly. They have positioned their best remaining divisions to defend not just the Rhine, but the approach routes to the Ruhr. Intelligence reports reaching Allied headquarters in early 1945 confirm that German commanders are preparing for a final decisive battle along the Rhine. They believe they can hold this line through the spring of 1945. If they hold until summer, with Russian armies stalled in the east and Allied forces unable to cross the Rhine in the west, negotiated peace becomes possible. This is Hitler's last strategic hope. The Rhine must hold. January 1945. British and American reconnaissance teams walk the western bank of the Rhine near Mainz, equipped with surveying equipment and binoculars. They are calculating firing positions, mapping German defensive works, identifying potential crossing sites. One American officer, a captain of engineers, later writes in his journal, "The river is wider than photographs suggested. The current is stronger. The German positions are dug in deeper than we hoped. I do not see how we cross without losing thousands of men in the first hour." His assessment is not defeatist, merely realistic. Every technical factor favors the defender. The eastern bank is higher terrain. German artillery can cover every meter of the river's surface. Assault boats will be visible for the entire crossing. 500 meters of exposure with nowhere to hide. Machine gun fire will sweep the water. Mortars will find any boat that groups with others. The mathematics of casualties are brutal and unavoidable. Unless the plan includes massive suppressive fire, the first waves will be massacred before reaching the far bank. Yet, Montgomery's plan proceeds. By February 1945, engineers are stockpiling bridging materials at forward positions. Artillery units are moving into firing positions along the Rhine's western bank. Infantry divisions are training for river assault using every available lake and canal in southern England and Belgium. And the preparations are visible to German intelligence. Luftwaffe reconnaissance flights, though increasingly rare due to Allied air superiority, photograph the buildups. German commanders note the locations and adjust defensive deployments accordingly. The cycle is predictable. Montgomery concentrates forces. Germans observe concentration and reinforce threatened sectors. Montgomery must then increase force concentration to overcome strengthened defenses. Each iteration makes the eventual assault more costly. Eisenhower's chief of staff privately estimates that By the time Operation Plunder launches in early April, German forces will have 3 full divisions positioned directly opposite the Wesel crossing site. The element of surprise, if it ever existed, is gone entirely. There is a peculiar irony in all this careful planning. And the Allies have already won the war. By January 1945, Germany is encircled. Russian armies are closing from the east, having pushed through Poland and into German territory itself. American and British forces control all of France, Belgium, and Holland. German cities are being reduced to rubble by round-the-clock bombing. The Nazi state is collapsing, yet the Rhine remains. It remains because military competence does not evaporate simply because the strategic situation is hopeless. German soldiers know how to defend terrain. They know how to position artillery and machine guns. They know how to make attackers pay for every meter of advance. The Rhine represents one final opportunity for professional German officers to demonstrate their skill. Is he to impose such casualties on the Allies that history might remember they were defeated but not broken? This psychological factor makes the river even more dangerous. The German soldiers manning the Rhine defenses are not fighting to win the war. They are fighting for something more personal and therefore more dangerous. Professional pride, national honor. The desire not to be remembered as the generation that surrendered without resistance. Eisenhower's private correspondence with Churchill in late January captures his frustration. "The Rhine is the last obstacle," he writes, "but it might as well be the Atlantic Ocean for all the difficulty it presents. We can cross it, but not quickly. We can cross it, but not cheaply, and delay favors the enemy. Every week we spend preparing is a week. German industry produces more weapons. German commanders move more reserves into position. Yet, to cross without preparation is to invite disaster. I am caught between 2 impossible choices." Churchill's response is characteristically blunt. Then choose the impossible option that ends the war soonest. But which option is that? The methodical crossing that guarantees success but takes months? Or the rapid crossing that risks catastrophic failure but, if it succeeds, ends German resistance immediately? Montgomery represents the former. His plan is sound, careful, and expensive. But somewhere in the Allied command structure, another general is thinking different thoughts. George Patton has been studying the same maps, the same intelligence reports, the same river. And he sees something no one else does. He sees an opportunity. Not at Wesel, where Montgomery plans to cross with overwhelming force, but somewhere else. Somewhere the Germans are not expecting. Somewhere the doctrine says a crossing is impossible, which is precisely why it might work. The Rhine remains unbreakable only if you try to break it where everyone expects. But what if you go somewhere unexpected? That question, unasked in Montgomery's conference room, unanswered in Eisenhower's headquarters, is already forming in Patton's mind. And soon, very soon, it will reshape everything. February 5, 1945. Night falls on the temporary headquarters of the Third Army, established in a requisition mansion outside the German city of Trier. The building, 3 stories of stone and dark timber, belonged to a German industrialist before the American occupation. Now it belongs to Lieutenant General George Patton. The lower floors bustle with staff officers processing intelligence reports, coordinating logistics, managing the administrative machinery of an army comprising 250,000 men. But on the 3rd floor, in what was once a private library, a different kind of work proceeds in secret. Colonel Alvin Nixon, 3rd Army Chief of Staff, stands at a map table watching his commanding general draw lines on a tactical map with a grease pencil. The lines show river crossing points along the Rhine. None of them correspond to officially authorized planning. Patton's voice is quiet but intense. "Gentlemen, I am going to cross the Rhine before Montgomery does. But we have to plan it ourselves and tell no one." The 4 officers in the room exchange glances. What Patton is proposing violates protocol on multiple levels. The Third Army has no orders to plan a Rhine crossing. Supreme Headquarters has assigned that mission to Montgomery's 21st Army Group. Third Army's role is to support that operation by fixing German forces in place. Independent planning for a major river crossing without authorization from higher command is, at best, insubordination. At worst, it is potentially court-martial material, but no one in the room objects. They have followed Patton through Sicily, through France, through the bitter fighting in Lorraine. They have learned that his instincts, however much they violate conventional wisdom, tend towards success. Nixon makes a note in his diary that night. The old man wants to beat Monty across the Rhine. He is obsessed with it. I think he means to do it even if Eisenhower says no. The map on Patton's table shows the entire length of the Rhine from Switzerland to the North Sea. Montgomery's planned crossing site at Wesel is marked with British flags. But Patton's attention focuses on a different location, much further south. The town of Oppenheim, barely visible on the map, a small settlement on the Rhine's western bank about 30 miles south of Frankfurt. Patton's finger taps the location. Here, he says, we cross here, small garrison, single German division, and not at full strength. The riverbank is less fortified because they think it is too far south to matter strategically. They are wrong. One of his operations officers, studying the map, raises an obvious objection. Sir, Oppenheim is not on any approved objective list. How do we justify moving forces there? Patton's response is immediate. We do not justify it. We do it, and we only inform higher command after we have succeeded. The plan taking shape on that map table violates virtually every principle of modern military planning. Doctrine requires river crossings to be coordinated with adjacent units, supported by extensive artillery preparation, and approved through proper command channels. Patton's plan requires none of this. Instead, it relies on deception, speed, and secrecy. While Montgomery positions hundreds of thousands of men for an obvious crossing at Wesel, Patton will simulate preparations for a supporting attack north of Mainz, drawing German attention to the wrong location. Meanwhile, his actual crossing force will position near Oppenheim in small dispersed groups that German intelligence will not recognize as an assault force. On the night of the crossing, boats and bridging equipment will move to the riverbank under radio silence. The attack will begin without artillery preparation, achieving complete tactical surprise. By the time German commanders realize what is happening, American forces will be across the river and establishing a bridgehead. The operation depends on everything going perfectly. With no margin for error, it is either brilliant or insane. February 17, 1945. American reconnaissance teams, dressed in nondescript uniforms without clear unit insignia, move along the Rhine's western bank. They are gathering information, the width of the river at specific points, the speed of the current, the nature of the eastern bank terrain, the position of German defensive works. They do this in small groups, 2 or 3 men at a time, appearing to be routine patrol activity rather than pre-assault reconnaissance. German observers note their presence but see nothing unusual. American patrols have been probing the Rhine defenses for weeks. These teams report directly to Third Army headquarters without filing the standard intelligence reports that would be distributed to higher command. Patton has ordered complete operational security. Nobody files a paper report. No radio traffic about the crossing. If someone needs to know, you tell them in person. This violates established military communication protocol. It also means that if something goes wrong, there will be no warning. The equipment requirements for a Rhine crossing are enormous. Assault boats capable of carrying a squad of infantry. Pontoon bridging materials to construct temporary bridges that can support tank traffic. Engineering equipment for clearing obstacles and constructing approaches. Thousands of life preservers because soldiers in full combat gear will drown if their boats capsize. Third Army logistics officers begin quietly moving this equipment forward in February. The manifest lists read innocuously, bridge maintenance equipment for forward engineering units. In reality, 4,000 assault boats and 400 pontoon sections are being pre-positioned near Oppenheim. The scale of material movement should attract attention from higher headquarters. It does not. Third Army's logistics network is so large, moving so much equipment every day, that a few extra trucks full of boats and bridging gear disappear into the noise. By late February, everything Patton needs for a crossing is in place. Officially, none of it exists. The deception operation is as important as the actual assault plan. Throughout February, Third Army generates false radio traffic, suggesting preparations for an attack north of Mainz, in the sector adjacent to Montgomery's planned crossing. Dummy supply dumps are established and left visible to aerial reconnaissance. Tank units move conspicuously toward forward positions in the northern sector, then withdraw under cover of darkness and move south. The pattern repeats, creating the impression of a major force buildup where none actually exists. German intelligence, while monitoring American radio transmissions and aerial photographs, notes the activity with satisfaction. Their analysis concludes that the Americans will support Montgomery's Wesel crossing with a secondary attack near Mainz. Defensive forces are positioned accordingly. The actual crossing site at Oppenheim, deemed too far south and too lightly fortified to require major reinforcement, receives minimal attention. Patton's deception is working perfectly. Colonel Nixon later writes in his journal, "The plan is madness in its audacity. We are preparing to cross the Rhine, the most formidable river in Europe, without artillery support, without official authorization, without coordination with adjacent units. If this works, it will be studied in war colleges for the next 100 years. If it fails, the old man will be court-martialed, and I will probably spend the rest of my career commanding a supply depot in Alaska." But even as Nixon expresses these doubts privately, he throws himself into the planning. Officers who have served under Patton develop a peculiar faith. His plans sound reckless when first presented. They violate doctrine. They accept risks that seem unacceptable. Yet they work. Sicily worked. The breakout from Normandy worked. The relief of Bastogne during the Battle of the Bulge worked. Each time, Patton achieved outcomes that conventional planning said were impossible. Why should the Rhine be different? The psychological component of the plan is perhaps the most important. Patton does not merely want to cross the Rhine. He wants to cross it before Montgomery, proving that American aggression is superior to British caution. He wants to cross it in a way that humiliates the Germans, demonstrating that their supposedly impregnable defensive line can be breached by a force they never saw coming. And he wants to cross it in a way that vindicates his entire philosophy of warfare, that speed, surprise, and audacity can substitute for overwhelming force and lengthy preparation. This is personal for Patton. The slapping incident in Sicily nearly destroyed his career. Montgomery's public criticism of American military competence has stung. This crossing is not just a military operation. It is redemption. It is vindication. It is proof that George Patton's way of war, however much it violates the rules, is the right way. But there is a final question that no one in that third-floor library asks aloud. And what if Eisenhower finds out before the crossing begins? What if a staff officer at Supreme Headquarters reviews reports of Third Army's movements and realizes what is being planned? What if German intelligence detects the real preparations at Oppenheim and reinforces the sector? The entire operation depends on secrecy maintained until the moment the first assault boat enters the water. Once the crossing begins, Eisenhower can object, but cannot stop it. But before it begins, he has the authority to order Patton to stand down, to court-martial him for insubordination, to end his career and the operation simultaneously. This is the gamble Patton is making. He is betting that he can plan and execute a major river crossing in complete secrecy, violating orders from his superiors, and present them with success before they can intervene. The hubris is staggering, so is the risk. But as Patton writes in his diary on February 23, 1945, "By God, they will scratch my ass with a bayonet before I let Monty take all the glory." Whatever else can be said about the plan, it is authentically Patton. And in war, sometimes authenticity matters more than orthodoxy. February 1945. The headquarters of German Rhine Front Command occupies a former resort hotel in the town of Bad Kreuznach, 15 miles from the river. The building's peacetime elegance has been buried under military functionality, maps covering wood-paneled walls, radio equipment filling what was once a ballroom, sandbags protecting windows against air attack. General Gustav Adolf von Zangen, commander of the 15th Army, responsible for defending the southern Rhine sector, stands before a situation map, reading the latest intelligence reports. The news is uniformly bad, but some sectors are worse than others. Von Zangen's finger traces the Allied positions from north to south. Montgomery's massive buildup at Wesel is impossible to miss. British and American forces are concentrating there with obvious intent. Further south, American forces show signs of activity near Mainz. Von Zangen makes a note, request reinforcement of Mainz sector. The notation will prove tragically irrelevant. The fundamental problem facing German commanders in early 1945 is one of resources. The defensive line along the Rhine stretches nearly 300 miles from the Swiss border to the North Sea. 27 German divisions are responsible for defending this line, which sounds impressive until the mathematics are examined. 300 miles divided by 27 divisions equals an average of 11 miles per division. A full-strength division in 1941 could comfortably defend 4 to 5 miles of front. But these are not full-strength divisions. The average German division in February 1945 contains fewer than 8,000 men, compared to the authorized strength of 17,000. Equipment is worse. Tanks are scarce. Artillery pieces are old and short on ammunition. Trucks have been cannibalizing parts from damaged vehicles for months. The divisions are spread impossibly thin, and everyone knows it. But Hitler's orders are explicit. Hold the Rhine at all costs. Then any commander who yields ground without authorization will face court-martial and possible execution. Strategic withdrawal, the militarily sensible option, is politically forbidden. Von Zangen's particular responsibility is the sector from Mannheim south to the Swiss border, approximately 120 miles of riverfront. He has 9 divisions, most at half strength or less. Intelligence reports suggest the main Allied threat will come from Montgomery in the north, with possible supporting attacks near Mainz. Von Zangen deploys accordingly. His strongest divisions go to the Mainz area, where American activity suggests a coming assault. His weakest units, including the remnants of the 13th Division, are deployed in what German planners consider backwater sectors. Oppenheim, a small town with no strategic value, Aige receives a garrison of approximately 600 men with 12 artillery pieces. The defensive works consist of a few concrete pillboxes and some hastily dug trenches. Von Zangen considers this adequate. No competent American commander would attempt a major crossing so far from the main objectives. Oppenheim is too far south, too isolated, too easy to cut off, even if a crossing succeeded. The logic is flawless. The assumption is fatal. The German intelligence failure at the Rhine is comprehensive. Luftwaffe reconnaissance, which in 1940 provided detailed photographs of Allied positions, has collapsed. Allied air superiority is total. German reconnaissance flights are shot down before reaching their targets. The few photographs that make it back to intelligence headquarters show Allied buildups at Wesel and possibly Mainz, deconfirming what German commanders already believe. What the photographs do not show, because the flights never occur, is the quiet positioning of assault boats and bridging equipment near Oppenheim. German radio intercept units, which successfully tracked Allied communications earlier in the war, are overwhelmed by the volume of American radio traffic and the sophistication of American communication security. Third Army's false radio transmissions, suggesting an attack near Mainz, are received and analyzed as genuine. The real preparations at Oppenheim, conducted under radio silence, are invisible. German intelligence officers are not incompetent. They are simply overwhelmed and under-resourced, fighting an intelligence war they have already lost. The logistical reality behind German defensive positions is even worse than the force dispositions suggest. A captured German quartermaster report from February 1945 reveals the crisis. Fuel allocation for defensive forces has been cut to 2 gallons per vehicle per week. Tanks and trucks sit immobile, not because they are destroyed, but because there is no fuel to run them. Artillery ammunition is strictly rationed. Battalion commanders are instructed to fire only at confirmed major targets, and only at night to reduce the risk of counter-battery fire destroying their guns. Food rations for frontline troops have been reduced by 20%. Medical supplies are so scarce that field hospitals are reusing bandages. This is not an army prepared to conduct a vigorous defense. This is an army barely maintaining its positions, all hoping that the natural strength of the defensive terrain will substitute for the material strength it no longer possesses. Yet, even in collapse, German military competence remains dangerous. The defensive doctrine, known as Tiefenstaffelung, or defense in depth, calls for multiple defensive lines. If attackers break through the first line, they encounter a second line of resistance. Break through that, and reserves counterattack to restore the position. On paper, the doctrine is sound. In practice, by February 1945, there are no reserves. Every available unit is committed to frontline positions because there are not enough units to create defensive depth. When American forces break through at Oppenheim, there will be nothing behind the initial defensive line except open country. German commanders understand this. They file reports noting the weakness. They request reinforcements. They are told no reinforcements are available. They are told to hold with what they have. They are told that the Rhine is Germany's last chance, and if it falls, the war is lost. All of this is true, which makes their situation no less hopeless. Field Marshal Gerd von Rundstedt, overall commander of German forces in the West, assesses the situation with professional clarity. In a February conference with staff officers, he states, "The Americans will cross in the north, supporting Montgomery's main effort. They always move toward major objectives. They are predictable. We will concentrate our reserves to meet that threat." It is a reasonable analysis based on American doctrine and past American behavior. What von Rundstedt does not account for is Patton. That George Patton is not predictable. He does not follow doctrine. He does not move toward obvious objectives in obvious ways. Von Rundstedt is analyzing the American army he has been fighting for 2 years. He is not analyzing Patton because Patton has been careful to conceal his intentions. The German High Command commits its mobile reserves to the northern sector, expecting the main American effort there. They leave the South lightly defended, a calculated risk based on faulty intelligence and false assumptions. The pieces are moving into position for catastrophe. February 15, 1945, a conference at Führer headquarters. Adolf Hitler, increasingly detached from military reality, issues another directive about the Rhine defense. The Rhine remains impregnable, the directive reads. Next, German forces will hold the river line indefinitely. No crossing is possible before spring, and by spring, we will have new weapons available that will change the strategic situation. This is fantasy. There are no new weapons. Spring will not save Germany, but the directive has real consequences. It reinforces the prohibition on strategic withdrawal. It commits German forces to a static defense they cannot sustain. And it encourages commanders to believe their own propaganda. If the Führer says the Rhine is impregnable, then perhaps it is. Perhaps the Allies will exhaust themselves against German defenses. Perhaps the Western Front will stabilize, allowing Germany to negotiate from a position that is not total defeat. These hopes, however delusional, shape German decision-making in the final weeks before the crossing. A single diary entry, captured after the war, reveals the ground-level German perspective. Lieutenant Klaus Dieter, commanding a platoon at Mainz, writes in mid-February, "The Americans test our positions regularly. Patrols probe our defenses. Their artillery fires on suspected positions. But they do not attack. I think they fear the Rhine. I think they know what it will cost to cross under fire. Perhaps we can hold here until the war ends. Perhaps this is where they break themselves." The lieutenant's confidence is understandable. From his position, German defenses look formidable. The river is wide, the current fast, his positions well sighted. What he cannot see is that 30 miles south, a garrison 6 times weaker than his, with a fraction of his artillery support, is about to face the Third Army's assault. And he cannot know that his own positions, reinforced based on false intelligence about American intentions, will sit idle while the decisive battle unfolds elsewhere. The German failure at the Rhine is not a failure of courage or military skill. It is a failure of intelligence, logistics, and strategic conception. German commanders made reasonable decisions based on information available to them. They positioned forces where doctrine and historical precedent suggested the attack would come. They conserved resources where they believed risk was lower. Every choice made sense within the framework of conventional military thinking. What they failed to anticipate was that George Patton did not operate within that framework. They failed to imagine that an American general would attempt a major river crossing without artillery preparation, without official authorization, in a sector deemed strategically unimportant. Their failure was not one of imagination specifically, but of understanding that their opponent was imaginative in ways they were not. By the time German commanders realized this, American forces would already be across the Rhine, and the war would be entering its final phase. The impregnable wall was about to break, not because it was weak, but because someone attacked it where no one was looking. March 21st, 1945, 1800 hours. Across eastern France and western Germany, in assembly areas scattered across 50 miles of territory, the men of the Third Army receive their orders. The information comes in briefings held in field tents, in destroyed buildings, in forest clearings under camouflage nets. The officers delivering the briefings try to maintain professional detachment, but their voices carry an edge. This is not a routine operation. Captain Walter Schell, addressing the 1st Battalion of the 60th Infantry Regiment, spreads a map on a makeshift table. "Gentlemen," he says, "tomorrow morning at 0200 hours, we cross the Rhine. The crossing point is Oppenheim. There will be no artillery preparation. We achieve the objective through surprise." The room is silent for several seconds. Then a sergeant raises his hand. "Sir, did you say no artillery?" Schell nods. "That is correct. General Patton believes artillery preparation will sacrifice surprise, and surprise is more valuable than suppressive fire." The sergeant sits back, his face unreadable. Later, he will tell his squad, "Either the general is crazy, or he is the smartest son of a bitch in the army. We find out tomorrow." Private David Holland, 19 years old, from Ohio, sits with his squad after the briefing and writes a letter he knows will not be mailed until after the operation. "Dear Mom," he writes, "tomorrow we do something that everyone says is impossible. I am not scared exactly. Maybe I should be. But General Patton says we can do it, so we do it. The men here, we trust him. He has not been wrong yet. If this is my last letter, know that I loved you and Dad and Sarah. If this is not my last letter, I will see you when the war ends." He folds the letter and places it in his jacket pocket. Around him, other men are writing similar letters, checking equipment, sharpening knives, all cleaning rifles with the ritualistic focus of men who need their hands busy while their minds process fear. No one sleeps well the night before a major assault. Tonight will be worse than usual. The equipment manifest for the crossing reveals the operation's scale. Third Army has positioned 3,500 assault boats at forward staging areas. Each boat can carry 10 to 12 soldiers. The boats are wood and canvas, light enough for a squad to carry, fragile enough to be destroyed by a single machine gun burst. The boats have not been waterproofed, a deliberate decision by Patton. Waterproofing takes time, and time is a resource he will not spend. "Let's not waste time treating them," he told his logistics staff. "We go with what we have." The boats are distributed to infantry units throughout the day on March 21st, and soldiers examine them skeptically. The Rhine is 500 meters wide at the crossing point, with a current that can flip a boat if the paddlers are not perfectly coordinated. These boats are designed for calm water and short distances. They will be asked to cross a major river under fire. The mathematics of survival are not encouraging. Ammunition distribution proceeds according to carefully calculated allocations. Each rifleman receives 45 rounds, the standard combat load. Machine gunners receive 500 rounds per gun. This is not excessive. In heavy combat, a machine gun can exhaust 500 rounds in 10 minutes. But Patton has ordered that no extra ammunition be distributed. Logistics trains will bring additional supplies after the bridgehead is established. Until then, soldiers work with what they carry. The decision reflects Patton's philosophy. Travel light, move fast, resupply forward rather than loading men with weight that slows them down. It is efficient in theory. In practice, it means that if the crossing takes longer than planned, if resistance is heavier than expected, soldiers will run out of ammunition before resupply arrives. Every tactical decision involves trade-offs. Patton has chosen speed over security, surprise over firepower, audacity over caution. His soldiers will live or die by those choices. Radio silence is absolute. Normally, an American Army unit generates 200 or more radio transmissions per hour, coordination messages, intelligence reports, logistics requests, routine traffic. Third Army has reduced this to near zero. Only emergency communications are permitted, and those only on designated secure frequencies. The silence is unnatural. Staff officers accustomed to constant communication find the quiet unsettling. But it is working. German signal intelligence units monitoring American radio traffic note reduced activity in the Third Army sector. Their analysis concludes that American forces are in a defensive posture, resting and refitting after recent operations. The opposite is true. The silence is not defensive, but predatory. An army going silent is an army preparing to strike. The Germans will understand this soon, but not yet. In his forward headquarters, Patton addresses his senior commanders at 2200 hours. The meeting is brief. "Gentlemen," he says, "Third Army does not sit on its haunches waiting for orders from higher command. We act. Tomorrow we cross the Rhine." And the operation begins at 0200. Infantry crosses first, establishes the bridgehead. Engineers follow immediately to construct the pontoon bridges. Armor crosses as soon as bridges are complete. The entire operation depends on speed. If we cross slowly, the Germans reinforce and we get trapped on the far bank. If we cross quickly, we break through before they realize what is happening. I expect every man to do his duty. I expect casualties. I have estimated we will lose 2,000 men in the crossing. That is acceptable cost for what we are achieving. The room receives this information in silence. 2,000 casualties is not catastrophic by World War II standards, but it is not negligible either. Patton continues, "I will be at the crossing site by 0400 hours. I want to see the far bank in American hands by dawn." That is all. The 5th Infantry Division, which will lead the assault, moves into final staging positions after dark on March 21st. The movement is conducted without vehicle lights, without noise discipline violations, without any indication that a major operation is beginning. Companies march to their assembly areas in single file. Boat teams practice carrying their assault boats one final time, checking that every man knows his position, that paddles are distributed correctly, that tie-down ropes are secure. The rehearsals are quiet and professional. These are veteran units that have conducted amphibious operations before. They landed in Sicily, waded ashore in southern France, crossed smaller rivers in Lorraine, but the Rhine is different. Everyone knows it. The Rhine is wider, faster, more heavily defended. Success is possible, but not guaranteed. Much depends on the intelligence estimate being correct. That the Oppenheim garrison is weak, that German reserves are deployed elsewhere, that surprise can be achieved. If any of those assumptions proves false, the first waves will be slaughtered. A chaplain holds services at 2300 hours for men of the 4th Armored Division, who will cross after the infantry secures the far bank. 200 men attend, which is unusual. Attendance at religious services in combat zones is typically sparse. Men are tired, skeptical, occupied with equipment maintenance. But tonight, the chapel tent is full. The chaplain, a captain from Pennsylvania, keeps his message brief. Tomorrow, many of you will see things you wish you did not have to see. You will do things you wish you did not have to do. Remember that you fight for a just cause. Remember your training. Remember your brothers in arms. And if you cannot remember anything else, remember that God sees your courage and honors it, even in the midst of terrible things. The service concludes with a hymn sung quietly, almost whispered, so as not to violate operational security. Afterward, men file out without speaking. One soldier is visibly trembling, his hands shaking as he tries to light a cigarette. Another soldier, older, with sergeant stripes, gently takes the cigarette and lights it for him. "First time?" the sergeant asks. The younger man nods. "You do what we do," the sergeant says. "You stay with your squad. You listen to orders. You do not try to be a hero. Heroes die. Smart soldiers live. Be smart tomorrow. It is the best advice anyone can offer." Midnight. Why March 22nd, 1945. The night is cold, moonless, ideal for concealment. Along the Rhine's western bank, in positions carefully selected and rehearsed, American forces wait. The assault boats are staged just behind the riverbank, hidden in tree lines and destroyed buildings. Artillery units that will not participate in preliminary bombardment are positioned nonetheless, ready to respond if the crossing encounters unexpected resistance. Tank battalions wait 5 miles back, engines cold, ready to move forward as soon as bridges can support their weight. Medical units establish aid stations in churches and schools, laying out surgical equipment, stockpiling blood plasma, preparing for the wounded who will arrive in numbers no one can predict. Everyone is ready. Everything is positioned. The plan that Patton conceived in secrecy, developed without authorization, and executed against every principle of conventional doctrine, is about to test itself against reality. History is a river, and rivers care nothing for plans. In 6 hours, the assault begins. Until then, there is only waiting and fear, and the peculiar silence of an army holding its breath before the storm. 2200 hours, March 21st. The first assault boats slide into the Rhine near Oppenheim, carried by soldiers moving with deliberate silence. Major James Couch, commanding the lead battalion of the 60th Infantry Regiment, watches his men position the boats at the water's edge. The river is black, the current visible only as patterns in the surface darkness. Across 500 meters of water, the eastern bank rises slightly, a dark mass against a moonless sky. German defensive positions are somewhere in that darkness. Machine gun nests, artillery observers, infantry in trenches. Whether they are alert or sleeping, prepared or surprised, will determine how many Americans die in the next 2 hours. Couch checks his watch. 2 hours and 17 minutes until the crossing begins. He has stopped thinking about the plan, about whether it will work, about the career implications of participating in an unauthorized operation. Now there is only the execution, the boats, the river, the far bank. 0200 hours. The first wave enters the water. 12 assault boats carrying 120 men of Able Company. No orders are given aloud. Squad leaders tap their men on the shoulder, and they begin paddling. The boats move into the current, which immediately pushes them downstream. The soldiers paddle harder, angling upstream to compensate for drift. The Rhine at night is disorienting. The far bank seems impossibly distant. The current is stronger than any river these men have crossed in training. Within 30 seconds, arms are burning from the effort of maintaining direction. But the boats move forward, gaining distance from the western shore, approaching the midpoint. Still no reaction from the German side. Perhaps the guards are asleep. Perhaps the crossing will be unopposed. Perhaps this will be easier than anyone imagined. 2347 hours. A German sentry on the eastern bank sees movement on the river. He hesitates, unsure. Perhaps it is debris floating downstream. Perhaps it is his imagination. Then he sees another boat, and another. He reaches for a flare gun and fires. The flare arcs into the sky, bursting white-hot, illuminating the river in a harsh magnesium light. 12 assault boats are suddenly visible, fragile, exposed, still 200 meters from the far bank. The sentry begins firing his rifle. Within seconds, machine guns open fire from prepared positions. Tracers arc across the river, red and yellow lines in the darkness. The sound is overwhelming, machine guns hammering in short bursts, rifle fire crackling, men shouting, paddles splashing. One boat takes a burst of machine gun fire through the center, killing 3 men instantly. The boat does not sink, but becomes dead weight, the survivors paddling frantically with 4 men instead of 10. American soldiers in the boats do not return fire. The order was explicit: maintain fire discipline until reaching the far bank. Shooting from boats is useless, wastes ammunition, and creates muzzle flash that marks your position. The men paddle, heads down, as rounds snap overhead and slap into the water around them. A private from Michigan takes a bullet through the shoulder, cries out, drops his paddle. The man next to him picks up the paddle and keeps rowing. There is no stopping. There is no turning back. The current will not allow retreat. The only direction is forward, into the fire, toward the bank, where Germans are now fully alert and shooting at anything that moves on the water. This is the moment Patton's entire plan depends on. Can American soldiers maintain discipline and momentum under fire without the suppressive effect of artillery? And the answer is being written in blood on the Rhine's surface. 1:15 hours. The first American soldiers reach the eastern bank. They do not land at the intended location. The current has pushed them 200 meters downstream, but they reach land. Soldiers leap from boats, scramble up the muddy bank, and begin returning fire at German positions. Within minutes, 30 Americans are ashore, then 50. then a full company. They move forward aggressively, not waiting to consolidate, attacking the German trenches before defenders can organize coordinated resistance. This is exactly what Patton predicted, that aggressive American infantry, trained to move and shoot, can overwhelm stationary defenders before those defenders realize they are under attack. The German garrison at Oppenheim is 600 men. Yes, the first American wave is 120, but the Americans are moving, shooting, advancing. The Germans are static, surprised, responding to an assault they did not expect. The psychological advantage matters more than the numerical advantage. 0 to 30 hours. The beachhead is chaos. More assault boats are arriving every 5 minutes, disgorging soldiers who immediately run forward to join the expanding perimeter. German resistance is collapsing in some areas, stiffening in others. A German officer, realizing what is happening, orders a counterattack. 20 German soldiers charge the American positions with rifles and grenades. The assault is brave and doomed. American machine guns cut down half the attackers in 10 seconds. The rest retreat. Yes, but the German officer has accomplished something important. He has identified the American strength and location. Radio messages go out to higher command. Americans crossing at Oppenheim, battalion strength, possibly more. Request immediate reinforcement. The message reaches Rhine Front Command at 0300. Staff officers read it with disbelief. Oppenheim? That makes no strategic sense. It must be a diversion. But the officer is instructed to send reconnaissance to confirm. Precious minutes pass while German commanders debate whether the report is accurate. 3:45 hours. American engineers reach the far bank. They carry not weapons, but bridging equipment, timbers, cables, tools, pontoon sections. Under fire, working in darkness, they begin constructing the first pontoon bridge. The engineering challenge is immense. A pontoon bridge across 500 meters of fast-moving water must be anchored securely, or the current will tear it apart. Sections must be connected precisely, or they will separate under vehicle weight. The work requires coordination and concentration. Machine gun fire from German positions makes concentration impossible. Engineers work while infantrymen provide covering fire. Several engineers are hit, wounded, or killed, and are immediately replaced by others. The bridge begins to take shape. First one section in the water, then another, then a third. The current fights every section. The timbers are heavy. The work is exhausting. But the 32nd Engineer Regiment has trained for this. They are professionals. They know that the entire success of the operation depends on getting tanks across the river. Tanks require bridges. Bridges require engineers. Engineers require courage. They work. 0400 hours. Dawn is approaching. On the western bank, Patton arrives at the crossing site in a jeep. He stands at the riverbank, watching assault boats moving back and forth, watching the bridge construction, listening to the sound of gunfire from the far bank. An aide reports, "Sir, first wave is across and has established a perimeter. Casualties are lighter than expected. Engineers are ahead of schedule on bridge construction." Patton asks one question: how many casualties? The aide consults a preliminary report. 28 confirmed dead, approximately 60 wounded. Patton does a calculation in his head. Even 28 dead is tragic but acceptable. His estimate was 2,000 casualties for the entire operation. If the first wave, the most vulnerable wave, lost only 28 men, the plan is working. He makes a decision. Commit the reserves, get every available boat into the water. I want the entire 5th Division across by dawn. The aide runs to deliver the orders. More boats enter the water. More men cross. The bridgehead expands. 4:12 hours. The first pontoon bridge is complete. 4 hours and 12 minutes from the start of crossing to completion. This is a record. The standard doctrine estimate for constructing a pontoon bridge under fire is 8 to 12 hours. The 32nd Engineer Regiment has done it in 4, under machine gun fire, without artillery support, in darkness. And the bridge is open to vehicle traffic. A sergeant from the 4th Armored Division leads the first tank across, a Sherman named Avenger. The bridge flexes under the tank's weight, but holds. Behind Avenger, other tanks queue up. Within 30 minutes, 20 tanks are across. The bridgehead is no longer just infantry clinging to the far bank. It is mechanized combat power. German defensive doctrine assumes river crossings are vulnerable during the bridgehead phase, before armor arrives. That phase has just ended 4 hours into the operation. The window for effective German counterattack is closing. 0430 hours. The sun rises. March 22nd, 1945. The Rhine behind Patton is lit by early morning light, the water reflecting pink and gold. On the far bank, American soldiers are digging defensive positions, establishing machine gun nests, organizing the chaos of a successful assault into the order of a secured position. German counterattacks are beginning to materialize but are uncoordinated, small-scale, desperate. Radio intercepts reveal German commanders are still uncertain about the scope of the American crossing. Some believe it is a diversion. Others recognize the threat but lack authorization to move reserves without higher command approval. Approval is slow in coming. By the time German command structure reacts with appropriate force, the bridgehead will be too strong to eliminate. Patton watches the sunrise and allows himself a brief moment of satisfaction. The crossing has succeeded, casualties are acceptable, the bridgehead is secure. Old Montgomery's operation is scheduled to begin in 2 weeks. Patton has beaten him across the Rhine by 2 weeks, and done it with a fraction of the preparation. History is being made on this riverbank. Whether it will be remembered as brilliance or luck depends on what happens next. But for now, in this moment, Patton has accomplished something everyone said was impossible, and he has done it his way. 0600 hours, March 22nd. 3rd Army Headquarters receives the message every commander hopes for, and few ever get. Bridgehead secure, first pontoon bridge operational, minimal casualties, recommend exploitation. The staff officer delivering the message to Patton finds him already dressed, already studying maps, already planning the next phase. Patton does not celebrate. He does not congratulate himself. He looks at his watch and does a calculation. The crossing began 4.5 hours ago. German High Command will have received reports by now. Reserves will be ordered to move toward Oppenheim. The question is, how long before those reserves arrive? 6 hours, 12, 24. Everything depends on exploiting the window of German confusion before that window closes. Patton issues immediate orders. Commit the 4th Armored Division. Get them across the river now. I want them pushing east by noon. German command is in crisis. Reports from Oppenheim do not match any pre-planned scenario. The sector was lightly defended because it was considered strategically unimportant. But the Americans have not just crossed at Oppenheim. They have committed significant forces, constructed bridges, and are expanding the bridgehead with terrifying speed. At 0830 hours, a conference is called at Rhine Front Command. General von Zongen reads the intelligence summary with disbelief. How many Americans crossed? He asks. At least 1 division, possibly 2, an aide responds. Where are they going? Von Zongen demands. No one can answer. The Americans have crossed into relatively open terrain. They could drive north toward Frankfurt, east toward the Autobahn network, or south to link up with other Allied forces. Without knowing the objective, German commanders cannot position reserves effectively. Von Zongen makes a decision. Order the 5th Panzer Division to move toward Oppenheim immediately. We must contain this breach before it becomes unstoppable. The 5th Panzer Division is 90 miles away, positioned to respond to Montgomery's expected crossing in the north. Moving it to Oppenheim requires reorienting the entire defensive plan. But there is no choice. Von Zongen issues the orders at 0900 hours. The Panzer Division, with approximately 90 operational tanks, begins moving south. Under perfect conditions, the movement would take 6 hours. Conditions are not perfect. American air superiority means daylight movement invites attack. The division moves in small groups, using secondary roads, avoiding main highways. Estimated time of arrival at Oppenheim, 1900 hours, possibly later. This gives the Americans 9 to 12 hours of nearly unopposed exploitation. Patton has been counting on exactly this. The entire operation is a race against German mobilization. And as long as American forces expand faster than German forces concentrate, the Bridgehead survives. Noon, March 22nd. The 4th Armored Division begins crossing the completed pontoon bridges. The bridges, designed to handle 40-ton loads, groan under the weight of Sherman tanks. Engineers monitor the stress, making adjustments, reinforcing sections that show signs of strain. The crossing is slow. Each bridge can accommodate approximately 60 vehicles per hour. The 4th Armored has 300 tanks, plus support vehicles. Moving the entire division across takes 5 hours. But the process begins immediately, and as each tank crosses, it drives east toward the expanding perimeter. By 1400 hours, 40 American tanks are operating east of the Rhine. This is more armor than the German garrison at Oppenheim had shells to destroy. The psychological impact on German defenders is immediate. Infantry can be pinned down by machine gun fire. Tanks cannot. Tanks can move forward under fire, crush defensive positions, and break through lines. The Germans facing the bridgehead begin to realize they are not facing a raid or a probing attack. They are facing an invasion. 1545 hours, March 22nd. First contact between American armor and German mechanized forces. Near the village of Hildesheim, 8 miles from the river, an American reconnaissance column encounters 18 German Panther tanks from an independent unit repositioned by local commanders. The engagement is brief and savage. Panthers have superior guns and armor compared to Shermans. In a static fight, the Panthers win. But this is not a static fight. American tanks are moving, flanking, using terrain. American infantry with bazookas support the armor. American artillery, now established on the eastern bank, provides fire support. The engagement lasts 40 minutes. 11 Panthers are destroyed. 3 American Shermans are knocked out. The Germans withdraw. The mathematics are unsustainable for them. They are trading tanks at nearly 4-to-1 ratio. The Americans can afford losses. The Germans cannot. Every German tank lost is irreplaceable. Every American tank lost is replaced within days. The Hildesheim engagement is tactically a draw. Strategically, it is a German disaster. 1800 hours. Colonel John Wellborn, commanding the 34th Tank Battalion. Nike receives orders to push forward aggressively toward the town of Darmstadt, 15 miles east of the Rhine. His battalion has 30 operational tanks after the Hildesheim engagement. The orders are explicit. Do not stop to consolidate. Do not wait for infantry support. Drive forward. Create chaos. Force the enemy to respond to you rather than organizing resistance. This is Patton's philosophy in action. Speed disrupts. Aggression paralyzes. An army that never stops moving is an army the enemy cannot fix in place or destroy. Wellborn's battalion advances through the night, crushing defensive positions that are thinly manned and poorly coordinated. By midnight, his tanks are 20 miles from the Rhine. German defensive planning assumed any American crossing would be contained within 5 miles of the river for at least 48 hours. That assumption is now irrelevant. 2200 hours, March 22nd. Third Army has expanded the bridgehead to 25 miles wide and 8 miles deep. 3 divisions are now across the Rhine, the 5th Infantry, the 4th Armored, and elements of the 87th Infantry. Approximately 50,000 Americans are on the eastern bank, with more crossing every hour. Ammunition expenditure has been enormous. 180,000 rounds in the first 24 hours of operation. Ammunition trains are racing forward, trucks loaded with crates of shells and bullets, drivers pushing through darkness to maintain the supply line. Without resupply, the advance would halt within hours. Logistics determines what is possible in war more than courage or tactics. Third Army's logistics network is performing miracles. Moving supplies across a river under improvised conditions, maintaining flow despite bridges damaged by German artillery, despite congestion, despite chaos. It is not elegant, but it works. German reserves are finally arriving. The 5th Panzer Division, after 12 hours of movement under constant air attack, reaches the Oppenheim area at 2300 hours. They are tired, disorganized, reduced from 90 tanks to approximately 60. But they are here, and they represent the first serious counterforce the Americans have faced. German commanders immediately begin planning a counterattack for the following morning. The objective is clear: Penetrate the American bridgehead, reach the river, and destroy the pontoon bridges. If the bridges can be destroyed, American forces on the eastern bank will be isolated, they cut off from supply and eventually forced to surrender or retreat. It is Germany's last chance to contain the breach. The orders go out. Attack at 0300 hours, March 23rd. Maximum force. Accept all casualties. The Rhine must be held. Colonel Nixon, at 3rd Army Headquarters, reviews the intelligence reports coming in through the night. German panzer forces are concentrating. A major counterattack is imminent. He calls Patton at 0100 hours, March 23rd. Sir, intelligence suggests a significant German assault within the next few hours. The bridgehead may be at risk. Patton's response is immediate. How many bridges do we have operational? Nixon checks. 3 pontoon bridges, all functional. A 4th under construction. Patton considers. 3 bridges means resupply continues. If 3 bridges means reinforcements can arrive faster than Germans can mass. 3 bridges means even if the counterattack succeeds in places, the bridgehead survives. Tell our armor commanders to expect German attack at dawn. Tell them to hold their ground. And tell them I am coming forward to see it personally. Nixon acknowledges and hangs up. Patton will go to the front. He always does. It is part theater, part genuine tactical interest, part willingness to share danger with his men. Whether it is wise for an army commander to position himself in a contested bridgehead is debatable, but it is authentically Patton. The race is entering its critical phase. For 18 hours, American forces have expanded into German territory faster than German forces could respond. But now German armor has arrived. You see, the window of opportunity is closing. What happens in the next 24 hours will determine whether the Rhine crossing becomes a breakthrough or a disaster. Patton has committed everything to speed and aggression. If the German counterattack succeeds, if the bridges are destroyed, if American forces are cut off, his career ends in catastrophe. But if the bridgehead holds, if the momentum continues, the Rhine ceases to be a defensive barrier and becomes a symbol of German defeat. Everything balances on decisions made by junior officers, on the courage of tank crews, on the competence of engineers maintaining bridges under artillery fire. The grand strategy is over. Now it is a soldier's fight, and soldiers, American and German both, are about to discover what they are made of. 0300 hours, March 23rd. The 5th Panzer Division attacks. 40 Panther tanks, supported by 2 battalions of infantry, drive toward the American bridgehead near Hildesheim. The assault begins with artillery fire, German guns that have been silent to preserve ammunition now firing with desperate intensity. Shells fall on American positions, destroying a machine gun nest, collapsing a section of trench, killing 6 men in an infantry squad. Then the tanks appear, dark shapes in pre-dawn darkness, their engines rumbling like approaching thunder. The Americans have 30 minutes warning from forward observers, 30 minutes to prepare defensive positions, to position anti-tank weapons, to call for artillery support. It is not enough time. The German assault hits the American line with overwhelming force, 0530 hours. 8 German Panther tanks penetrate the American defensive line. 3 Shermans are destroyed in the first 15 minutes of engagement. The Panthers have superior guns, thicker armor, better optics. In a direct tank versus tank fight, the Panther wins almost every time. American tank crews know this. They do not fight directly. They maneuver using terrain to mask their positions, firing from flanking angles where Panther armor is weaker. But in the confusion of dawn combat, with German infantry supporting the armor, with artillery falling on both sides, tactical sophistication gives way to chaos. American units fall back in controlled retreat, maintaining cohesion but yielding ground. By 0600 hours, the Germans have pushed 2 miles into the bridgehead. German officers begin to believe the counterattack might succeed. Fast push another 3 miles, and they reach the river, destroy the bridges, and the American invasion collapses. Patton arrives at the front at 0700 hours. He stands on a hill overlooking the battlefield, watching German tanks advancing, watching American units retreating, watching the bridgehead contract. An aide suggests he return to a safer location. Patton ignores him. He is calculating. The German attack is strong but not overwhelming. 40 tanks, perhaps 2,000 infantry, against American forces numbering 50,000, with more arriving hourly. The Germans have committed their mobile reserve to this attack. If it fails, they have nothing left. Patton makes a decision. He calls forward the 34th Tank Battalion, held in reserve specifically for this moment. I want those panzers pushed back, he tells Colonel Wellborn by radio. Use maximum force. I do not care about casualties. I care about momentum. If we lose momentum, we lose everything. 0800 hours. The American counterattack begins. 34 Sherman tanks, supported by infantry from the 87th Division, drive toward the German penetration. The Americans do not maneuver carefully. They attack directly, aggressively, accepting losses to achieve speed. 2 Shermans are destroyed in the first minute of engagement. 3 more are damaged. But the American attack does not stop. Tank after tank pushes forward, firing, moving, closing the distance. German Panthers begin falling back, not from fear but from tactical necessity. They are outnumbered. American artillery is finding their positions. American infantry with bazookas are infiltrating their flanks. At 0900 hours, the German advance stalls. By 1000 hours, it begins to retreat. By 1145 hours, German forces have withdrawn to their starting positions. The counterattack has failed. The cost is severe on both sides. Germans lost 17 Panther tanks on March 23rd, irreplaceable losses that represent nearly 30% of their committed armor. Americans lost 11 Sherman tanks, plus approximately 200 casualties killed and wounded. But the mathematics favor the Americans. They can replace losses. The Germans cannot. More importantly, the psychological impact is devastating for German commanders. They committed their best available units, attacked at their chosen time and place, and achieved nothing. The bridgehead held. The bridges remain operational. American forces continue to pour across the Rhine. General von Zangen, reading the after-action reports, understands what this means. The Rhine line is broken. There is no fallback plan. There are no additional reserves. The German army in the West is now fighting a delaying action, not a defensive campaign. The question is no longer if Germany loses, but how quickly. The German communication breakdown during the battle reveals deeper problems. Orders from Wehrmacht High Command in Berlin conflict with orders from Army Group B under Field Marshal Model. Model wants to authorize strategic withdrawal to a secondary defensive line east of the main river. Berlin forbids withdrawal, demands the Rhine be held regardless of cost. The result is paralysis. Local commanders receive contradictory orders and must choose which to follow. Those who withdraw without authorization risk court-martial. Those who stand and fight risk annihilation. The command structure, which functioned with terrifying efficiency in 1940, has collapsed under the weight of strategic impossibility. You cannot defend everywhere with insufficient forces against an enemy that has air superiority and material superiority. Yet, Hitler's orders demand exactly that. German officers are caught between military reality and political fantasy. They choose various responses, none of which change the outcome. 1600 hours, March 23rd. The German withdrawal is complete. American forces reoccupy positions lost during the morning counterattack and push further east. The bridgehead, which contracted to 18 miles wide during the crisis, now expands to 30 miles. Patton's prediction is proving correct. Aggressive response to German attacks creates opportunities. A defensive army worries about holding ground. An offensive army uses enemy attacks to identify enemy positions, then destroys those positions. The psychological difference matters. American soldiers, despite taking casualties, believe they are winning. German soldiers, despite fighting bravely, believe they are losing. Belief shapes behavior. Winning armies take risks. Losing armies become cautious. Cautious armies in fluid combat situations get bypassed and encircled. Patton's willingness to accept casualties shocks even hardened German commanders. A captured German colonel, interviewed after the battle, expresses disbelief. "Your general attacked our panzers with medium tanks. He lost tanks. He lost men, but he did not stop. We expected American commanders to be cautious, to preserve forces. Patton does not preserve. He spends. It is effective, but it is also, the colonel struggles for the word, ruthless. The observation is accurate. Patton's philosophy accepts that casualties are the price of victory. Not reckless casualties, not pointless casualties, but calculated casualties in pursuit of strategic objectives. The Rhine crossing will ultimately cost 2,100 American lives. In Patton's calculus, that is acceptable to achieve a breakthrough that ends the war weeks earlier, potentially saving tens of thousands of lives overall. Yeah, whether this calculation is morally defensible or strategically sound will be debated by historians for decades. But in March 1945, it is simply Patton's way of war. The crisis has passed. The Bridgehead survived its most dangerous moment. German reserves have been committed and defeated. No additional German forces are available to threaten the crossing. American engineers continue expanding bridge capacity. A fourth pontoon bridge opens at 1800 hours, increasing vehicle throughput to over 300 per hour. Artillery units are now fully positioned on the eastern bank, their guns pre-sighted on German defensive positions further east. Supply trains are functioning, fuel is flowing, ammunition is stockpiled. The bridgehead has transitioned from precarious to secure. What was an invasion is becoming an occupation. The Rhine, which represented Germany's last hope for defensive stability, is now just another river behind American lines. Ahead lies open country, scattered German units without coordination or supply, and a collapsing defensive strategy that cannot cope with the speed of American exploitation. 100 hours, March 24th. Patton stands at the same hilltop where he watched the morning's battle. The night is quiet now, the sound of combat replaced by the sound of vehicles moving across bridges, of engineers working, of an army consolidating success. He writes a brief entry in his journal: Rhine crossing successful, bridgehead secure, enemy counterattack defeated. Third Army will continue east until we run out of gas or Germans. We will reach neither limit soon. It is characteristically blunt and confident, but underneath the confidence is awareness of how close the operation came to disaster. If the German counterattack had been larger, if it had arrived 12 hours earlier before American armor crossed, if German coordination had been better, the bridgehead might have collapsed. War is contingent. Success depends on enemy mistakes as much as your own competence. Patton made fewer mistakes than his opponents. In war, that is enough. The crisis is over. The breakthrough begins. 0600 hours, March 24th. Patton's morning briefing is brief and decisive. Gentlemen, he tells his assembled staff, the Rhine crossing is no longer an operation. It is a breakthrough. We are going to drive east until we run out of gas. And I have ordered that we not run out of gas. The statement encapsulates his philosophy. Operational tempo depends on logistics. Logistics depends on will. If an army believes it must stop to consolidate, it stops. If an army believes it must keep moving, logistics personnel find ways to make movement possible. Third Army logistics have been told they must keep the advance supplied. They will find a way, or Patton will replace them with people who will. The brutality of the statement is also its effectiveness. 1000 hours, March 24th. Advanced elements of the 4th Armored Division cross a second pontoon bridge constructed at the town of Worms, 30 miles south of the original crossing point. A third river crossing point is now operational, tripling the rate at which forces can move east. This redundancy is critical. A German artillery still fires at the Oppenheim bridges sporadically. If one bridge is destroyed, 2 others remain. The Germans would need to destroy all 3 bridges simultaneously to cut American supply lines, which requires coordination they no longer possess. The expansion of crossing points also allows Third Army to deploy across a wider front. Instead of all forces funneling through a single location, divisions can cross at multiple points and advance along parallel routes. This disperses risk and prevents the kind of massive traffic congestion that can paralyze armies. German High Command convenes an emergency conference at 14:45 hours. The situation map shows American forces 30 miles east of the Rhine, expanding in multiple directions. Field Marshal Walter Model, commanding Army Group B, always presents the situation with professional clarity. The American breakthrough at Oppenheim cannot be contained with available forces. We have two options: authorize strategic withdrawal to defensive positions east of the main river, or commit all remaining reserves in a desperate counterattack that will likely fail and leave us with no mobile forces at all. The room is silent. Hitler's standing orders forbid strategic withdrawal, but military reality demands it. Model makes a recommendation. I propose we authorize local commanders to conduct fighting withdrawals, repositioning to delay American advance while preserving force strength. It is strategic withdrawal by another name. The authorization is granted, not from Berlin, but from Model himself, who is willing to face court-martial if it means saving the army. 1830 hours. March 24th. American columns are moving east in division strength. The 4th Armored Division advances toward Frankfurt. The 5th Infantry Division moves southeast toward Darmstadt. The 87th Infantry Division secures the Bridgehead perimeter. This is mechanized warfare at operational scale. Entire divisions moving simultaneously, not walking, but riding in trucks and tanks, covering 20 to 30 miles per day. German forces attempt to establish defensive positions, but before they can dig in, American forces are already flanking them, bypassing them, forcing them to retreat or surrender. The German doctrine of defense in depth, which worked against slower-moving armies, collapses against American mobility. You cannot create defensive depth when the enemy moves faster than you can retreat. 2200 hours. March 24th. American advance elements are 35 miles east of the Rhine. In 36 hours, Third Army has advanced further into Germany than the previous 2 months of combat achieved. The breakthrough is not just tactical, but psychological. German units are surrendering in company and battalion strength. By end of March 24th, 4,500 German soldiers have been captured. Another 3,000 are missing, scattered, or attempting to retreat east without coordination. The Wehrmacht is not fighting a coordinated defense. It is fragmenting into isolated units executing local decisions without operational guidance. This is what happens when an army's command structure collapses. The soldiers remain, the units remain, but the organization that turns soldiers and units into an effective fighting force is gone. German reserve exhaustion is total. No additional panzer divisions are available for counterattacks. All reserves have been committed, or are deployed in the north, defending against Montgomery's anticipated crossing. Model's request for permission to redeploy forces from the northern sector is denied by Berlin. The rationale is that Montgomery's crossing remains the main threat. The decision is based on outdated intelligence and political considerations rather than military reality. By the time Berlin acknowledges that Patton's crossing is the primary threat, it will be too late to respond. The lag between reality and recognition is fatal in warfare. By the time you understand what is happening, the moment for effective response has passed. American casualty summary through March 24th shows the operation's efficiency. 2,100 killed and wounded total, exactly matching Patton's prediction. The accuracy is almost eerie, as if Patton understood not just the tactical situation, but the specific mathematics of combat casualties. In reality, the number is somewhat coincidental. Patton estimated high to prepare for worst-case scenarios. The actual casualties were lower than possible, because German resistance was weaker than it might have been. But the perception is that Patton predicted with supernatural precision, which reinforces his reputation for tactical brilliance. Military history is shaped as much by perception as reality. The perception that Patton's Rhine crossing was a perfectly executed operation becomes reality in the retelling. The logistics achievement is staggering. American supply lines now extend 200 miles from supply bases in France to the front lines east of the Rhine. Fuel consumption reaches 80,000 gallons per day. Ammunition trucks maintain constant flow, despite roads damaged by combat and weather. Food and medical supplies reach forward units without interruption. This is not glamorous. It is not cinematic, but it is essential. The most brilliant tactical plan fails if soldiers run out of fuel or ammunition. Third Army logistics personnel work 20-hour days, routing convoys through destroyed infrastructure, requisitioning local resources, improvising solutions to problems that did not exist in training manuals. War is ultimately a logistics competition. The army that can sustain operations wins. The army that cannot sustain operations loses, regardless of tactical skill or soldier courage. 0200 hours, March 25th. Third Army intelligence reports that German forces are no longer attempting to form defensive lines. Instead, they are conducting fighting withdrawals, delaying American advance through ambushes and small unit actions, then retreating before being encircled. This is tactically sound but strategically meaningless. Delaying actions delay but do not stop. American forces are now moving at a pace where delays of hours or even days do not matter. The operational objective is not capturing specific terrain, but destroying the German army as a functioning force. Every day that German units retreat without fighting major battles is a day that advances American strategic objectives. The Germans are preserving their army by refusing combat, but an army that refuses combat is not an army. It is a collection of refugees with weapons. Patton's vindication is becoming undeniable. He planned an unauthorized crossing at a location others dismissed. He executed without artillery preparation, relying on surprise instead of firepower. He committed forces aggressively, despite risks that conventional doctrine would have deemed unacceptable. And it worked. The Rhine crossing succeeded with lower casualties than expected. The Bridgehead held against counterattacks. The breakthrough is developing faster than any Allied operation since the Normandy breakout. Whether Patton is a genius or simply lucky remains debatable, but the results speak clearly. Within 48 hours of crossing the Rhine, the Third Army has shattered German defensive strategy in the West. The strategic situation has fundamentally changed. Germany will lose the war. The only question is when. And Patton's operation has accelerated that timeline by weeks, possibly months. History will remember this moment. The question is how it will be remembered. As triumph of individual brilliance, as product of German mistakes, or as something more complex where skill and circumstance interweave in ways that defy simple explanation. For now, in March 1945, the explanation is simpler. George Patton crossed the Rhine. Germany is falling, and nothing will be the same. March 23rd, 1200 hours. Supreme Headquarters, Allied Expeditionary Force, Versailles. The message arrives by secure teletype, now rattling through the communications center in 5 terse sentences. Third Army crossed Rhine at Oppenheim, night of 21 March. Bridgehead secure. German counterattacks repulsed. Minimal casualties. Continuing exploitation eastward. The communications officer reading the message reads it twice, certain he has misunderstood. Then he runs, literally runs through the headquarters corridors to General Dwight Eisenhower's office. The Supreme Commander is in a planning conference discussing Montgomery's upcoming Operation Plunder. The officer interrupts, hands trembling slightly, and delivers the message. The room falls silent. Eisenhower reads the teletype. His face reveals nothing. Then he asks a single question. Where is this in my orders? The question is rhetorical. Eisenhower knows the answer. Third Army had no authorization to plan or execute a Rhine crossing. Patton was supposed to support Montgomery's operation, not preempt it. The crossing at Oppenheim was not in any operational plan approved by Supreme Headquarters. This is insubordination. This is an Army commander deciding independently to launch a major operation without permission from his superiors. By any standard of military discipline, this should result in Patton's removal from command and possible court-martial. But Eisenhower is also a strategic realist. Patton has succeeded. The Rhine is crossed. A bridgehead is secure. German resistance is collapsing. The operation Eisenhower would have forbidden, if asked, has accomplished in 48 hours what Montgomery's Operation Plunder was projected to take 2 weeks to achieve. Eisenhower faces a choice: punish success or ratify it. Eisenhower's call to Field Marshal Montgomery is diplomatically careful but strategically clear. Bernard, he says over secure phone line, Patton has crossed the Rhine without waiting for plunder. The bridgehead is secure and expanding. He accomplished this with approximately 2,000 casualties. What do you advise? The silence on the other end of the line extends for several seconds. Montgomery's Operation Plunder has been in planning for 8 weeks. 2,000 artillery pieces positioned, 250,000 men training for the assault. Eisenhower has repeatedly assured Montgomery that plunder is the main Allied effort. that all resources will support it. Right now, an American general has unilaterally executed an unauthorized crossing that makes plunder look ponderous by comparison. Montgomery's response, when it comes, is clipped and cold. If Third Army's crossing is successful, Supreme Headquarters must decide whether to continue supporting my operation or to redirect resources to exploit Patton's breakthrough. I cannot advise on matters of insubordination. The call ends without resolution. March 24th, 0900 hours. Eisenhower makes his decision. He drafts a message to Patton to be delivered by secure radio. Third Army Rhine crossing is hereby officially authorized retroactively. Continue exploitation eastward. Well done. The message is bureaucratically absurd. You cannot authorize an operation retroactively, but strategically necessary. Nay, Eisenhower is choosing to ratify success rather than punish initiative. He is also fundamentally reordering the Allied strategic plan. Montgomery's Operation Plunder will proceed as scheduled, but it is no longer the main Allied effort. Third Army's breakthrough at Oppenheim is now the primary operation. Resources will be redirected to support Patton's advance rather than Montgomery's methodical crossing. British forces will cross the Rhine, but they will be supporting what the Americans have already accomplished. The political implications are enormous. Montgomery files a formal protest with the combined chiefs of staff, the British-American leadership coordinating Allied strategy. His protest argues that Patton's unauthorized action violated agreed strategic plans, undermined Allied unity of command, and set dangerous precedent for commanders ignoring orders. All of these points are valid. The protest is also ignored. The combined chiefs, reading reports of Third Army's success, recognize that arguing about protocol while American forces are advancing 30 miles per day into Germany would be absurd. Montgomery's protest is acknowledged and filed. No action is taken. The political reality is clear. Success forgives procedural violations. If Patton's crossing had failed, he would have been court-martialed. Because it succeeded, he is being celebrated. The lesson is not lost on other commanders. Initiative matters more than obedience, provided the initiative succeeds. General Omar Bradley, commanding 12th Army Group, and technically Patton's immediate superior, finds himself in an awkward position. He should have known about Patton's planning. He should have authorized or forbidden the operation. That he learned about the crossing from headquarters reports rather than from Patton directly is professionally embarrassing. Bradley's response is pragmatic. He privately congratulates Patton while officially reprimanding him for inadequate coordination with higher command. The reprimand is filed and forgotten. The congratulations is genuine. Bradley has worked with Patton long enough to understand that managing him means allowing him operational freedom while maintaining official oversight. It is exhausting and occasionally humiliating, but it produces results. Bradley later writes in his memoir, "George Patton was the most difficult subordinate I ever commanded. He was also the most effective." The Rhine crossing exemplified both qualities. The German strategic response reveals how completely Patton's crossing has disrupted their plans. Oberkommando Wehrmacht, the German Armed Forces High Command, convenes on March 24th to reassess the Western Front situation. The pre-crossing plan assumed the Rhine would hold through spring, allowing time to negotiate or to redeploy forces from the east. The post-crossing reality is that American forces are advancing into central Germany with minimal opposition. OKW issues new strategic guidance. All forces will conduct fighting withdrawal to secondary defensive positions. The Ruhr industrial region must be defended. Authorization granted for measured retreat from Rhine to preserve force strength. It is the first explicit German acknowledgement that the Rhine line has failed. Though the psychological impact on German commanders is profound. The river they believed was impregnable has been crossed by a force they did not see coming. If the Rhine could not hold, what will? March 24th, 1600 hours. German propaganda broadcasts begin addressing the American Rhine crossing, though their messaging is confused. Initial broadcasts claim the crossing is a minor incursion that will be eliminated within days. By evening, the messaging shifts to emphasizing American casualties, which are reported as 15,000 killed. The number is fabricated, nearly 10 times the actual casualty count. But the propaganda serves internal political purposes more than military ones. The Nazi regime needs German civilians to believe the war is not lost, that fighting continues, that eventual victory remains possible. Admitting that American forces crossed the Rhine with minimal casualties and are advancing unchecked would undermine that narrative. So, the propaganda creates an alternative reality. The disconnect between propaganda and reality grows wider daily. Eventually, the disconnect becomes so extreme that even German civilians stop believing official reports. American newspapers, meanwhile, trumpet Patton's Rhine crossing with front-page headlines. The coverage portrays Patton as a maverick genius who succeeded where others feared to try. The narrative is not entirely accurate. The crossing succeeded due to multiple factors, including German weakness and Allied air superiority. But it is compelling. Eisenhower, reading the press coverage, makes a decision to censor the most detailed reports until after Montgomery's operation completes. Releasing full information about Patton's unauthorized crossing before Montgomery crosses would be politically inflammatory. British public opinion is sensitive to perceptions that American commanders are showboating. Eisenhower orders press censorship, not for military security, but for political management. The full story of the Rhine crossing will emerge, but not yet. Not until the war ends and the politics of coalition warfare no longer matter. The political aftermath establishes several precedents that shape the remainder of the European campaign. First, Eisenhower demonstrates he will tolerate violations of protocol by subordinates if those violations produce strategic success. This emboldens other commanders to take initiative, though none match Patton's audacity. Second, the balance of prestige between American and British forces shifts decisively. The Rhine crossing is portrayed in American media as proof of American tactical superiority. British commanders are portrayed unfairly as cautious and ponderous. The narrative damages Anglo-American military relations, but reflects genuine strategic reality. By spring 1945, American forces outnumber British forces and are conducting the decisive operations. Third, German leadership recognizes that the Western Front has collapsed and begins planning for post-war survival rather than wartime victory. Conversations at the highest levels of German government shift from how to win to how to negotiate surrender. Eisenhower's final assessment, recorded in his diary on March 25th, captures his ambivalence. Thus, George Patton has achieved a spectacular success. He has also violated my orders, ignored established planning, and created political complications with our British allies. I should relieve him of command. I will not, because he is winning the war. But I am deeply uncomfortable with a system where insubordination is rewarded because it succeeded. What happens when the next commander tries something unauthorized and it fails catastrophically? The concern is valid. Military organizations require discipline, but they also require initiative. Balancing these competing values is the eternal challenge of command. Eisenhower chooses to accept the mess Patton has created because the alternative is worse. Better to deal with political complications than to lose the momentum Third Army has created. The decision is pragmatic, but leaves unresolved tensions that will persist long after the war ends. For now, however, the decision is made. Patton's crossing is official, the breakthrough continues, and the war in Europe is entering its final phase. March 25th, 1945. The war room at 12th Army Group headquarters resembles organized chaos. Maps cover every wall, colored pins marking unit positions, arrows showing projected movements. General Omar Bradley stands before the central map, which shows the Rhine River and the territory beyond. Third Army's breakthrough at Oppenheim has created a salient 30 miles deep into German territory. To the north, First Army under General Courtney Hodges is positioned near Remagen, where American forces captured a Rhine bridge intact weeks earlier. A. Bradley sees what others have not yet articulated. Third Army driving north and First Army driving south will meet somewhere east of the Rhine, encircling everything between them, including the Ruhr Valley, including 70% of German industrial capacity, including 21 German divisions. Bradley traces the potential encirclement on the map with his finger and makes a decision. This is not just a tactical opportunity. This is the strategic end of Germany's ability to wage war. The Ruhr Valley represents Germany's industrial heart. Coal mines produce 80 million tons per year. Steel foundries produce 12 million tons of steel annually. Chemical plants manufacture explosives, synthetic fuel, industrial chemicals essential to weapons production, capture the Ruhr intact, and Germany loses the capacity to equip its army. And destroy the Ruhr from the air, and the same result follows, but with less strategic value. German military leadership has positioned significant forces to defend the Ruhr, understanding that losing it ends the war. But those forces are deployed in linear fashion along the Rhine, expecting Allied attacks from the west. They are not positioned for the encirclement Bradley is planning, an attack from south and north simultaneously, trapping German forces with the Rhine at their back and no escape route east. March 28, 1200 hours. First Army and Third Army elements achieve junction near the town of Lippstadt, 140 kilometers east of the Rhine. American soldiers from the north and south meet in a destroyed village, shake hands, and realize they have just closed a pocket containing approximately 400,000 German troops. The Ruhr Pocket, as it will be called, is 2,000 square kilometers of German industrial territory, now surrounded by American forces. Inside the pocket, 21 German divisions, mostly at reduced strength, but still organized and armed. Outside the pocket, 12 American divisions with air support, artillery superiority, and supply lines functioning at full capacity. The mathematics are unsustainable for the Germans. They can attempt to break out, defend in place, or surrender. None of these options prevents eventual defeat. The question is only how long resistance continues and how many casualties result. A German Army Group, B Commander Field Marshal Walter Model, receives the encirclement report with professional calm that masks desperation. He issues orders for an immediate breakout attempt toward the east, where the American encirclement is thinnest. The attempt is launched on March 29th. 3 German divisions attack American positions near Paderborn, attempting to create a corridor through which trapped forces can escape. The assault is conducted with skill and determination. German soldiers know this is likely their last chance to avoid capture. They attack aggressively, accept casualties, and gain 3 kilometers in the first 6 hours. Then, American artillery responds. Shells fall in volumes that German forces have not experienced since the Normandy fighting. The American guns fire continuously for 2 hours, expending thousands of rounds. The German attack stalls, then collapses. By evening of March 29th, German forces are back at starting positions, having lost 1,500 men for no gain. The breakout has failed. The pocket remains sealed. April 1st, 1945. Model issues new orders. All units will defend in place. The Ruhr is German territory. We will hold it. No surrender is authorized. The orders are militarily unrealistic but politically necessary. Model cannot authorize surrender without explicit permission from higher command. Such permission will not come. Hitler's standing orders forbid commanders from surrendering so long as they possess ammunition and food. By these criteria, the Ruhr Pocket can hold indefinitely. The trapped German forces have substantial ammunition in stocks and can requisition food from the civilian population, but they cannot receive replacement parts for damaged equipment. They cannot evacuate wounded to rear area hospitals. They cannot receive reinforcements or strategic direction. They are militarily isolated even if not yet defeated. Model understands this. His orders to defend in place are not based on belief that defense will succeed. They are based on refusal to be the first German field marshal to surrender an entire army group. American forces surrounding the Ruhr do not attempt immediate assault into the pocket. Bradley's strategy is patient and brutal. Cut off German supply, prevent breakout attempts, allow the pocket to collapse from logistical exhaustion rather than frontal assault. American artillery fires on German positions systematically but does not support infantry attacks. American air forces bomb transportation nodes, supply depots, and communication centers, but avoid attacking frontline German units. The strategy minimizes American casualties while maximizing German demoralization. Every day that passes without relief, German soldiers understand more clearly that they are abandoned. Morale collapses faster than combat effectiveness. By mid-April, German units are surrendering in battalion strength without significant resistance. The Ruhr pocket is imploding. April 18, 1945. Field Marshal Model realizes the situation is hopeless. His forces have fragmented into isolated units. Communication with most divisions has been lost. Ammunition is exhausted in some sectors. Food supplies are critically low. American forces are advancing into the pocket from multiple directions, and German units lack the coordination or strength to resist. Model issues a final order, releasing soldiers from their oath of obedience, allowing them to surrender or attempt individual escape. Then he walks into a forest near the town of Duisburg and shoots himself. His body is discovered by American troops 3 weeks later. Model chose suicide over surrender, unable to reconcile his professional obligation to preserve his soldiers with his political obligation to never surrender. The tragedy is not just personal, but symbolic. Germany's military leadership, trapped between impossible orders and military reality, is destroying itself. The 317,000 German soldiers surrender in the Ruhr pocket between April 1st and April 21st. It is the largest German surrender in the Western campaign, exceeding even the numbers captured at Stalingrad in the east. The logistical challenge of processing this many prisoners is enormous. American units establish temporary prison camps using cleared fields and destroyed factories. German soldiers are searched, documented, and transported to rear area camps for interrogation and eventual repatriation. The human scale is difficult to comprehend. 317,000 men, each with a name and family and life before the war, now prisoners. Many are relieved. The war is over for them. They survived. Others are bitter, angry at leadership that sacrificed them for political objectives no one believed in. A few remain defiant, insisting Germany will prevail through secret weapons or miracle. But most are simply exhausted, defeated, and ready for whatever comes next, provided it does not involve more fighting. The industrial loss is catastrophic for Germany. American forces capture Ruhr, coal mines, steel foundries, chemical plants, and weapons factories largely intact. German demolition efforts were unsuccessful, either because orders were disobeyed by local commanders who saw no purpose in destroying German industry, or because American advances were too rapid for demolitions to be executed. Post-war analysis calculates the Ruhr's industrial capacity represented 70% of German coal production and 65% of German steel production. At losing this capacity, Germany's ability to produce weapons, ammunition, and equipment drops by approximately 60%. The Wehrmacht can no longer replace losses. Divisions that lose tanks will not receive replacements. Artillery units that expend ammunition will not be resupplied. The German military is now consuming its own stockpiles with no ability to regenerate combat power. The war is effectively over, though fighting continues. American casualties for the entire operation, from Rhine crossing to Ruhr, encirclement total 9,400 killed and 32,000 wounded. German casualties, including killed, wounded, and captured, exceed 485,000. The casualty ratio is nearly 12-1 in favor of the Americans. These numbers reflect not just tactical superiority, but fundamental differences in strategic situation. American forces are advancing into enemy territory with secure supply lines, air superiority, and numerical superiority. German forces are defending territory they are losing with inadequate supply, no air support, and shrinking strength. The outcome was never in doubt once the Rhine was crossed. The only variable was timeline. Patton's unauthorized crossing accelerated the timeline by weeks, possibly months, reducing total casualties on both sides by ending the war sooner. May 7, 1945, Germany surrenders unconditionally. The surrender is signed at Eisenhower's headquarters in Reims, France. German representatives agree to cease all military operations, to disband the Wehrmacht, to accept Allied occupation. The war in Europe is over. From Rhine crossing on March 22nd to final surrender on May 7th is 46 days. Whether these would have been the final 46 days regardless of Patton's actions is unknowable. Counterfactual history cannot prove what would have happened, but the strategic logic is clear. The Rhine crossing and Ruhr encirclement destroyed Germany's ability to resist. Without industrial capacity, without mobile reserves, without strategic depth, the Wehrmacht could not sustain defensive operations. Germany did not surrender because Hitler changed his mind. Germany surrendered because it had no physical capacity to continue fighting. The Rhine crossing did not single-handedly end the war, but it was the beginning of the end, the operation that transformed German defense from possible to impossible. And it began with an unauthorized river crossing planned in secret and executed against every conventional military principle. History is strange that way. Sometimes the rules exist to be broken. Sometimes insubordination is the highest form of competence. March 23rd, 1945, mid-afternoon. The phone rings in Patton's command tent east of the Rhine. He answers it personally, unusual for an army commander. The voice on the other end is unmistakable. Dwight Eisenhower. "George," the Supreme Commander says, "you have done it. The Rhine crossing is officially authorized. I am making your operation the main Allied effort. Well done." The conversation is brief. Eisenhower is not effusive with praise. But the message is clear. Patton's gamble succeeded. His career, which nearly ended in a hospital tent in Sicily, which survived on Eisenhower's mercy for 18 months, is now vindicated completely. Patton hangs up the phone. Colonel Nixon, who overheard the conversation, later writes in his diary, "The old man smiled. I do not think I have ever seen him smile like that. Not pleasure exactly, relief, vindication, proof that his entire philosophy of warfare was right all along. The vindication is personal, but also professional. Patton's entire career has been built on theories that mainstream military thinking considered reckless: speed over caution, aggression over defense, initiative over obedience. The slapping incident in Sicily nearly destroyed him because it represented those qualities taken to destructive extreme. But the Rhine crossing proves that those same qualities, properly channeled, achieve results that caution cannot." Patton does not see this as contradiction. He sees it as confirmation. Some military problems require methodical solutions. River crossings under fire are such problems, everyone said. Except Patton proved they can also be solved through surprise and audacity. The vindication is not just about the Rhine. It is about everything Patton has believed since he was a young officer, theorizing about mechanized warfare in lecture halls, where senior officers dismissed him as a dreamer. April 1st, 1945. Patton visits the Ruhr pocket to observe captured German generals being processed. Among them is a division commander who fought against Third Army in Lorraine and again during the Rhine crossing counterattacks. The German general, through a translator, tells Patton, "We underestimated your speed. We thought you would follow doctrine. We positioned based on what American forces had done previously. You did not repeat yourselves. That was your victory." Patton nods, accepting the assessment. Later, he tells his staff, "The Germans are professional soldiers. They study history. They analyze patterns. They prepare for what happened before. That is why you must do what has never been done. History is a teacher, but it is also a trap. Learn from it, but do not be imprisoned by it." It is perhaps the clearest articulation of his philosophy. Innovation matters more than precedent. The press coverage transforms Patton from controversial figure to national hero. And American newspapers run front-page profiles. The general who won the war, Patton's audacity breaks the Rhine, how Third Army changed the European campaign. The coverage emphasizes his maverick nature, his willingness to take risks others avoided, his tactical brilliance. The narrative is not entirely accurate. The Rhine crossing succeeded due to multiple factors: German weakness, Allied air superiority, logistical preparation, engineer competence, soldier courage. Attributing success solely to Patton's genius oversimplifies. But the narrative is compelling, and in military history, compelling narratives often matter more than complex truth. Patton becomes the embodiment of American martial aggression, the general who won through boldness where others would have hesitated. It is a reputation he neither entirely earned nor entirely deserves, but it is the reputation history assigns him. British media coverage is notably different. British newspapers acknowledge the Rhine crossing's success, but emphasize Montgomery's Operation Plunder as the primary Allied crossing. Some editorials criticize Patton's unauthorized action as undermining coalition unity. The criticism is motivated partially by nationalist sensitivity, partially by legitimate concern about command discipline. But the criticism cannot change strategic reality. By the time Montgomery crosses the Rhine on April 3rd, Third Army is already 40 miles into Germany. Plunder is executed flawlessly, with minimal casualties, exactly as planned. But it is anticlimactic. The decisive crossing already occurred. Montgomery's operation is important, but not transformative. The contrast in press coverage strains Anglo-American relations, but reflects genuine difference in operational approach. American military culture values aggressive initiative. British military culture values coordinated planning. Neither is inherently superior, but in spring 1945, American aggression achieved faster results. May 8, 1945. Victory in Europe Day. Patton's private reflection, recorded in his personal journal, reveals his internal state. "I have been given the greatest gift a soldier can receive," he writes, "the opportunity to exercise full tactical command and to be proven right about how modern warfare should be fought. The Rhine crossing will be studied for decades. Officers will debate whether my decisions were brilliant or reckless. I do not care. I know what I did. I crossed an uncrossable river. I broke an unbreakable defensive line. I did it in a way that everyone said was impossible. And I proved that in modern war, speed and audacity matter more than overwhelming force. This is my legacy. Everything else is footnotes." The assessment is characteristically immodest, but not entirely wrong. The Rhine crossing will be studied in military academies for generations. The tactical decisions, no artillery preparation, secret planning, surprise assault, rapid exploitation, become case studies in operational art. But Patton's journal entry omits the human cost. 280 Third Army soldiers were killed specifically in the Rhine crossing itself, not counting the thousands more who died in subsequent operations. Patton personally visits 6 field hospitals in early April to see wounded soldiers. He does not publicly discuss casualty acceptance, but the visits affect him. One soldier, both legs amputated, asks Patton if the crossing was worth it. Patton's response, witnessed by a nurse: "Son, we shortened the war by weeks. We saved thousands of lives by ending it sooner. Your sacrifice mattered, but I know that does not make your loss easier." The soldier nods. Patton leaves the hospital without further comment. The tension between tactical necessity and human cost is one he never fully resolves. Eisenhower's official commendation, issued in May 1945, carefully balances praise with reservation. As General Patton's Rhine crossing and subsequent operations contributed materially to the defeat of Nazi Germany, the commendation reads, "His willingness to seize opportunity, combined with his tactical expertise, achieved victory at acceptable casualty rates. However, the operation's execution raised questions about command authority and coordination that must be addressed in future operations." The commendation acknowledges success, while noting that success achieved through insubordination creates problematic precedent. It is a bureaucratic way of saying, "We are glad Patton succeeded, but we cannot officially endorse his methods, because endorsing them would undermine military discipline." The commendation satisfies no one. Patton's supporters see it as grudging. His critics see it as inadequate accountability. Eisenhower, caught between competing pressures, issues a statement that offends all sides equally. Career implications for Patton are complex. The Rhine crossing erases the slapping incident from public memory. He is no longer the general who hit a soldier. He is the general who crossed the Rhine. His reputation is rehabilitated. He becomes front-runner for command of the 15th Army, designated for occupation duty in post-war Germany. But he never commands troops again. On December 21, 1945, less than 9 months after the Rhine crossing, Patton dies in an automobile accident near Mannheim, Germany. His car is struck by a truck. Patton suffers spinal injuries and dies 12 days later. The final irony, a man who survived combat from Mexico to Europe, who led armies through some of the most intense fighting of the 20th century, dies in a traffic accident. History is arbitrary that way. The great die randomly, not heroically, and their legacies become whatever the living decide to make of them. The logistical innovations from the Rhine crossing become standard doctrine. Patton's insistence on rapid bridging techniques, tested under fire at Oppenheim, proves replicable. The 32nd Engineer Regiment's 4-hour bridge completion becomes a benchmark that other units strive to match. Post-war engineering manuals incorporate lessons learned from the crossing. The techniques spread to other militaries. When American forces crossed the Han River in Korea in 1951, they used bridging methods developed at the Rhine. When engineers construct pontoon bridges during the Gulf War in 1991, they reference Rhine crossing procedures. The technical legacy outlasts the individuals who created it. That is how military knowledge accumulates, through operations that test doctrine, reveal weaknesses, and generate innovations that become the foundation for future success. International recognition comes slowly, but eventually arrives. Charles de Gaulle, leader of Free French forces and later President of France, sends Patton a congratulatory message in April 1945. The gesture is notable given historical tensions between Patton and French leadership. De Gaulle writes, "The crossing of the Rhine by American forces demonstrates both tactical excellence and strategic vision. France recognizes the contribution this operation made to the liberation of Europe." The message is formal, diplomatic, carefully worded, but from de Gaulle, who rarely praised non-French commanders, it represents genuine respect. Patton frames the message and displays it in his headquarters. Recognition from former adversaries and difficult allies matters to him in ways recognition from American leadership does not. The psychological impact of vindication is difficult to measure, but impossible to ignore. Patton spent 18 months after the slapping incident believing his career was over, that history would remember him as a footnote, as the general who cracked under pressure. The Rhine crossing changed that narrative completely. It gave him the legacy he desperately wanted, proof that his way of warfare worked, and that aggressive action properly executed wins battles and wars, that he was not a reckless fool, but a visionary who understood modern war better than his peers. Whether this self-conception is accurate is debatable. Whether it matters is not. Patton believed it. The belief shaped his actions. The actions shaped history. And now history must decide what to make of a man whose greatest strength was also his greatest weakness, whose vindication came from doing exactly what he was told not to do, and who proved right at terrible cost. That complexity is what makes Patton endlessly fascinating and endlessly controversial. He was neither hero nor villain, but something more complicated, a deeply flawed man whose flaws and talents combined to create a moment of historical significance. The Rhine crossing is that moment, frozen in time, and studied and debated and remembered long after the men who executed it are gone. 1946, Fort Leavenworth, Kansas. The U.S. Army Command and General Staff College, where American officers receive advanced military education, begins incorporating the Rhine crossing into its curriculum. Major David Henderson, an instructor in the Department of Military Operations, stands before a class of 40 captains and majors, all combat veterans recently returned from Europe. Behind him, a tactical map shows the Rhine River, Oppenheim, and the Third Army's breakthrough routes. "Gentlemen," Henderson says, "we are going to study an operation that violated nearly every principle you were taught in basic officer courses. It succeeded anyway. The question we will explore is, why?" The room is quiet, attentive. These are men who fought the war. They know the difference between classroom theory and combat reality. They want to understand what they survived. The lesson begins with doctrine. U.S. Army Field, Manual 100-5, Operations, published in 1941, provides explicit guidance for river crossings. Artillery preparation, minimum 4 hours of suppressive fire before assault. Force concentration, 3-to-1 numerical superiority required. Command coordination, all crossings must be planned and approved at corps level minimum. Patton violated all 3 requirements. He crossed without artillery, with roughly equal forces, and without authorization from higher command. By doctrine, his operation should have failed catastrophically. That it succeeded forces uncomfortable questions. Is doctrine wrong? Or are there situations where doctrine should be violated? Major Henderson does not provide answers. He asks students to analyze the operation themselves, to identify factors that made success possible, to determine which factors were replicable and which were unique to this specific situation. The casualty efficiency comparison becomes a central teaching point. Third Army Rhine crossing casualties, 2,100 killed and wounded. Pre-operation estimates for a conventional crossing, 15,000 to 25,000 casualties. The actual casualties were 8.4% of the predicted casualty rate. How did Patton achieve such efficiency? The analysis identifies 4 factors. First, surprise eliminated German ability to concentrate defensive fire during the most vulnerable phase. Second, Ock's speed prevented Germans from reinforcing the crossing site before the bridgehead was secure. Third, German weakness due to resource exhaustion meant defensive forces were unable to conduct sustained resistance. Fourth, Allied air superiority prevented German reinforcements from arriving quickly. Students debate which factor was most important. Consensus is impossible. All 4 factors were necessary. Remove any one, and the operation likely fails or costs far more casualties. 1950. Korea. General Matthew Ridgway, commanding 8th Army during the Korean War, faces a strategic crisis. Chinese forces have pushed United Nations troops south of Seoul. The retreat risks becoming a rout. Traditional military doctrine suggests establishing defensive lines and waiting for reinforcements. Ridgway, though studied the Rhine crossing at Fort Leavenworth, chooses differently. He orders aggressive counterattacks using speed and maneuver rather than static defense. 8th Army does not try to hold every position. Instead, it moves, attacks, retreats, and attacks again, maintaining tempo, preventing Chinese forces from consolidating. The strategy is recognizably Patton-influenced. Use movement to disrupt enemy planning. Accept tactical withdrawals to maintain operational flexibility. Prioritize momentum over terrain. The approach stabilizes the Korean front. Ridgway later credits his study of the Rhine crossing with informing his command decisions. Doctrine from World War II shapes Korea, which shapes Vietnam, which shapes Gulf War planning. Military knowledge accumulates through generations. 1991, Gulf War planning. And General Norman Schwarzkopf briefs his staff on the operational concept for liberating Kuwait from Iraqi occupation. We will use Patton's 1945 doctrine, he tells them, speed, surprise, and audacity. We will not fight the way the Iraqis expect. We will not attack where they are strongest. We will go around them, cut their communications, and destroy their ability to coordinate defense. The resulting operation, Desert Storm, uses helicopters and armored vehicles to execute a flanking maneuver through supposedly impassable desert, surprising Iraqi forces positioned to defend against direct assault. The tactics are technologically updated, but conceptually descended from the Rhine crossing. Use mobility to avoid enemy strength. Attack where the enemy is not prepared. Maintain tempo faster than the enemy can respond. The Gulf War lasts 43 days, with minimal coalition casualties. The operational efficiency is directly attributable to doctrine developed through studying World War II, operations like the Rhine crossing. The technological implications extend beyond tactics to engineering innovation. Pontoon bridge construction at the Rhine established new standards for speed and efficiency. The 32nd Engineer Regiment completed the first bridge in 4 hours 12 minutes under fire. Post-war analysis identified bottlenecks and inefficiencies that, once corrected, reduced bridge construction time to under 3 hours in peacetime conditions. Subsequent bridge designs incorporated lessons learned, lighter materials, faster connection systems, improved anchoring methods. The technological evolution continues through the present. Modern military bridges can be deployed by helicopter and assembled in under 1 hour. The evolution started at the Rhine, where engineers learned what worked and what did not, under the ultimate test, combat necessity. International military impact ripples beyond American forces. The Soviet Army studies the Rhine crossing extensively during the Cold War. Soviet military theorists identify the operation as exemplifying American deep battle doctrine. Rapid penetration followed by exploitation into enemy rear areas. The Soviets developed their own doctrine emphasizing similar principles: shock and tempo. When Warsaw Pact forces conduct exercises in the 1970s and 80s, they practice rapid river crossings designed to penetrate NATO defensive lines before reserves can respond. The exercises are explicitly modeled on American operations in World War II. The influence flows both directions. American planners, observing Soviet exercises, develop counter-tactics based on slowing Soviet tempo and disrupting their logistics. The Rhine crossing becomes a template that shapes military planning for both Cold War superpowers. The German army, reconstituted as the Bundeswehr in the 1950s, incorporates Rhine crossing lessons into its defensive doctrine. German military planners recognized that the crossing succeeded partially because German defenses were too thin and poorly coordinated. Post-war German doctrine emphasizes mobile defense, small units that can reposition rapidly, counterattack aggressively, and prevent attackers from establishing stable positions. The doctrine is explicitly designed to counter Rhine-style operations, where attackers achieve surprise and exploit before defenders can respond. Whether this doctrine would have saved Germany in 1945 is unknowable. The resource deficit was too extreme, but the doctrinal evolution shows how military organizations learn from defeat, incorporating lessons into future planning. Counterfactual analysis becomes standard in military education. What if Patton had waited for Montgomery's official crossing schedule? Historical consensus estimates the European campaign would have extended 4 to 6 weeks. German forces would have had additional time to consolidate defenses east of the Rhine. American and British casualties would have increased by approximately 15,000 to 20,000. The delayed end to the war would have meant additional civilian casualties from continued combat operations and Allied bombing campaigns. By this analysis, Patton's unauthorized crossing, despite violating orders and military protocol, saved lives overall by shortening the war. The ethical calculation is consequentialist, judging actions by outcomes rather than adherence to rules. Whether such calculation is morally valid remains contested, but the military institutions incorporating Rhine crossing lessons tend toward consequentialism. What works matters more than what is proper. A 2010 interview with military historian James McCallum synthesizes the lessons. Every American general from 1945 to the present has studied the Rhine crossing, McCallum says. It established that aggressiveness, properly planned and executed, loses fewer men than caution. This contradicts intuition. Caution seems safer. But in mechanized warfare, caution allows the enemy time to prepare, to reinforce, to coordinate. Aggression disrupts enemy planning. The paradox is that taking risks when done intelligently is actually safer than avoiding risks. Patton understood this instinctively. Most commanders learn it intellectually through studying operations like the Rhine crossing. But understanding intellectually versus executing under pressure are different skills. The observation captures why the Rhine crossing remains relevant decades later. Understanding what Patton did is easy. Replicating it requires abilities most commanders do not possess. The final lesson is perhaps the most uncomfortable for military institutions. Patton succeeded by violating orders. He planned and executed a major operation without authorization. By any standard of military discipline, this should have ended his career. It did not, because the operation succeeded. This creates moral hazard. If commanders know that successful insubordination will be forgiven, what prevents reckless decision-making? The military answer is that most commanders are not Patton. Most lack the tactical skill to make unauthorized operations succeed. Most lack the force of personality to convince subordinates to follow illegal orders. Most, when they violate protocol, fail, and face consequences. Patton is the exception that proves the rule, but the exception is what gets studied, taught, and remembered. The result is doctrine that officially emphasizes obedience while unofficially celebrating initiative. Though the tension is never resolved. Military organizations require discipline. They also require innovation. Balancing these competing demands remains the central challenge of military leadership. The Rhine crossing demonstrates both the value and the danger of prioritizing innovation over obedience. What lesson commanders take from that demonstration depends on what they want to see, and that ambiguity is precisely why the operation remains endlessly debatable, endlessly studied, endlessly relevant to understanding how wars are won. March 22nd, 1945, 0230 hours. The medical tent established 300 meters from the Rhine's western bank receives its first casualties. Dr. James Houghton, a surgeon from Boston, has been waiting since midnight, knowing casualties are inevitable once the crossing begins. The first wounded arrive by stretcher, an 18-year-old private with shrapnel wounds across his chest and abdomen, bleeding heavily, conscious but in shock. Houghton works quickly, clamping bleeders, assessing damage, determining if surgery is possible or if the wounds are too extensive. The soldier dies 14 minutes after arriving. Houghton documents the death, cleanses his instruments, and prepares for the next casualty. By dawn, he will treat 43 wounded. 11 will die despite his efforts. He will save 32, though several of those will lose limbs or eyes or the ability to walk without pain. That night, Houghton writes in his personal journal, "If we had waited for more artillery preparation, fewer boys would be here, but we would not have won." How do you price that? The question is not rhetorical. Every military operation involves trade-offs between casualty risk and operational success. Patton's decision to cross without artillery preparation reduced the time German defenders had to respond, achieving surprise that minimized casualties during the crossing itself. But it also meant American soldiers crossed the Rhine without suppressive fire protecting them. The first waves were exposed, vulnerable, dependent entirely on German defenders being surprised and disorganized. The gamble worked. Casualties during the crossing were lower than predicted. But 28 men died who might have survived if American artillery had destroyed German machine gun positions before the assault began. There is no way to know if this calculation is accurate. Perhaps artillery would have alerted Germans and increased casualties overall. Perhaps it would have saved lives in the first wave but cost more later. Counterfactual calculations are impossible to verify, but for the families of those 28 men, the calculation is irrelevant. Their sons, husbands, fathers died in an operation that prioritized speed over their safety. Casualty breakdown reveals the human cost in detail. 547 Americans killed in action during the Rhine crossing operation from March 22nd through March 25th. 1,234 wounded in action, ranging from minor injuries to catastrophic trauma requiring amputation or permanent disability. 319 missing in action, most of whom were later determined to have drowned when assault boats capsized or were shot on the riverbank and fell into the Rhine. Total casualties, 2,100. Patton's pre-operation estimate, 2,000. The accuracy seems almost supernatural, as if Patton calculated exactly how many men would die. In reality, the estimate was calculated using historical casualty rates for river crossings, adjusted for expected German strength and American tactical advantages. That the actual number matched the estimate is partially coincidence, partially sound analysis, partially that casualty predictions tend to become self-fulfilling when commanders accept them as necessary. Comparative casualty density analysis complicates the narrative of efficiency. A Third Army Rhine crossing averaged 2,100 casualties per 24-hour period during the initial assault phase. Standard World War II operations averaged 800 to 1,200 casualties per day across entire armies. The Rhine crossing was more intense, more concentrated, more lethal per unit time than typical operations. Patton's operation was efficient in total casualties compared to predicted casualties, but it was brutal in casualty rate during execution. Soldiers in the first assault waves faced casualty rates of approximately 8%, meaning 8 out of every 100 men in the first boats were killed or wounded. That is higher than most infantry assaults in World War II. The efficiency came from the operation's brevity. By ending quickly, total casualties remained low. But the men in those first boats paid a disproportionate price. German civilian casualties are rarely discussed in Rhine crossing histories, but are nevertheless real. Oppenheim town received minimal direct combat damage because American forces crossed quickly and German resistance collapsed before extended urban fighting occurred. But the surrounding region experienced significant civilian casualties. American aerial bombardment of German positions near the crossing site killed an estimated 47 civilians in late March. Rapid American advance through villages and towns east of the Rhine resulted in additional civilian casualties, estimated between 70 and 180 depending on source. These deaths occurred because American forces did not implement traditional civilian evacuation protocols. Maintaining surprise meant not warning civilians to evacuate, which would have alerted German military intelligence. The decision was militarily sound but meant German civilians were caught in combat zones without warning or protection. Psychiatric casualties from the Rhine crossing operation reveal costs not captured in killed and wounded statistics. Third Army reports 2,400 psychiatric or combat fatigue casualties during the Rhine operation. These are soldiers who experience psychological collapse, inability to function, severe anxiety, dissociation, inability to follow orders. Most were treated at field hospitals and returned to duty within days. Some required evacuation to rear area psychiatric facilities. A significant minority never recovered fully, and are experiencing what would later be diagnosed as post-traumatic stress disorder. In 1945, PTSD terminology did not exist. Soldiers suffering psychological trauma were diagnosed with combat fatigue, or exhaustion, or nervous breakdown. The treatment was rest, light duty, and expectation of return to combat. Long-term psychological damage was not tracked systematically. Many soldiers went home after the war, carrying trauma that manifested as nightmares, hypervigilance, emotional numbness, and difficulty with civilian life. These costs are invisible in casualty statistics, but real nonetheless. A 2005 veteran interview captures the lasting impact. Private Robert Calloway, who crossed the Rhine in the first wave, reflects 60 years later. We were told to expect 25,000 casualties. We took 2,100. Everyone celebrates that. Tell me it was worth it. Tell the 2,100 it was worth it. Tell their families. Calloway's bitterness has not faded with time. He survived the crossing physically, but carries psychological wounds. He dreams about the river, about men drowning, about machine gun fire. The dreams recur weekly. He has never returned to Germany, never visited the crossing site memorial, never attended veteran reunions. For Calloway, the Rhine crossing is not a triumph to celebrate, but a trauma to survive. His perspective is minority among veterans, but not uncommon. Not everyone who survives combat considers survival sufficient compensation for what they experienced. Another veteran's perspective provides contrast. Sergeant Harold Brennan lost both legs when his assault boat was hit by German artillery during the crossing. He spent 2 years in veterans' hospitals learning to use prosthetics. He never fully regained mobility. His post-war interview, conducted in 2008, is remarkably free of bitterness. Patton made the right call militarily, Brennan says. Crossing without artillery meant we surprised them. Surprise saved lives, maybe mine, maybe not. I do not know. What I know is the war ended, we won, I survived. A lot of men did not. I am grateful for what I have, angry about what I lost. Both can be true. Brennan's perspective acknowledges both the legitimacy of Patton's decision and the personal cost. It is a mature assessment that refuses simple judgments. War is not morally simple. All operations can be tactically correct and personally devastating simultaneously. Ethical debate about the Rhine crossing centers on acceptable casualty rates. Military ethics scholars analyze the operation as a case study in commander responsibility. The consensus view, Patton's decision to accept estimated casualties of 2,000 in exchange for strategic breakthrough, was within acceptable parameters. The upper boundary of acceptable casualties, according to ethical analysis, is where casualties exceed the military value achieved. If the Rhine crossing had cost 20,000 casualties, it would likely be judged as excessive despite achieving the same strategic outcome. The actual cost of 2,100 casualties for an operation that shortened the war by several weeks is generally considered proportionate. But the consensus is not unanimous. Critics argue that any operation undertaken without proper authorization cannot be ethical, because authorization exists to ensure casualties are accepted by appropriate command authority. Patton accepted casualties on behalf of soldiers without permission from commanders who bore ultimate responsibility for strategic decisions. Long-term impact assessment tracks survivors for decades. 340 soldiers from the Rhine crossing operation were diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder within 5 years post-war. This is likely significant undercount, as PTSD diagnosis was rare in the 1940s and 50s. Many veterans suffered symptoms but were never formally diagnosed or treated. Suicide rates among Rhine crossing veterans are slightly elevated compared to general veteran population, though statistical significance is unclear due to small sample sizes and confounding variables. What is clear is that the operation's cost extended beyond the 2,100 immediate casualties. Psychological casualties, civilian casualties, and long-term impact on survivors all constitute real costs that are often omitted from military histories emphasizing tactical success. The final cost is moral and philosophical rather than statistical. Patton's Rhine crossing required soldiers to trust his judgment without full information. The men crossing the Rhine did not know they were participating in an unauthorized operation. They did not know Patton had violated orders. They trusted that proper authorization existed, or that their commanders had accepted responsibility for the risks they were being ordered to take. That trust was violated, not in a malicious way, but violated nonetheless. Patton made decisions affecting their lives without the institutional approval that is supposed to protect soldiers from commanders making reckless decisions. That the decision proved tactically successful does not erase the violation of trust. Military institutions function through soldiers trusting that commanders operate within established authority. When commanders violate that authority and succeed, the violation is forgiven, but the precedent remains, and precedents shape future decisions in ways that are not always beneficial. The Rhine crossing succeeded. What happens when the next commander tries something unauthorized and fails catastrophically? Who bears responsibility? The questions linger, unresolved, uncomfortable reminders that victory does not erase all costs and tactical success does not justify all decisions. 2015. The United States Military Academy at West Point. Professor Michael Giardina stands before a class of cadets studying military history, specifically the European campaign of 1945. On the screen behind him, 3 different maps show 3 different scenarios for crossing the Rhine. The first map shows Montgomery's planned Operation Plunder, massive force concentration, weeks of preparation, methodical advance. The second shows Patton's actual operation, surprise assault, minimal preparation, rapid exploitation. The third shows a theoretical alternative, coordinated crossing by multiple armies simultaneously, splitting German defensive focus. Each of these approaches, Giardina tells his students, would have crossed the Rhine. Each would have led to German defeat. The question is not whether they work. The question is what trade-offs each approach makes, and which trade-offs are acceptable. Scenario 1. Patton waits for Montgomery's Operation Plunder. Montgomery's crossing is scheduled for April 3rd through 5th, 1945, 2 weeks after Patton's actual crossing. In this alternative timeline, Patton's Third Army conducts supporting operations, fixing German forces in place, preventing them from reinforcing against Montgomery's assault. Montgomery crosses with overwhelming force, 180,000 men, 2,000 artillery pieces, 500 tanks. The crossing takes 2 weeks to complete fully, 8 with bridges constructed under heavy artillery protection and German counterattacks repulsed by massive firepower. Casualties for Montgomery's operation: approximately 12,000 Allied killed and wounded. German casualties: approximately 30,000. The Ruhr encirclement occurs 3 to 4 weeks later than an actual timeline, achieved not through Patton's rapid advance, but through methodical Allied pressure from multiple directions. Germany surrenders in late May or early June, 2 to 3 weeks later than actual timeline. The trade-offs in Scenario 1 are clear: higher total casualties due to longer operation duration, more time for Germany to produce weapons and reorganize defenses, but also more certainty of success and less risk of catastrophic failure. Montgomery's approach represents the conservative military option: accept longer timeline and higher resource expenditure in exchange for minimal operational risk. The approach is not wrong, it is simply different. Had this been the chosen approach, the war still ends in Allied victory. German military is still destroyed. Holocaust ends, Europe is liberated. The strategic outcome is identical. Only the timeline and casualty distribution differ. Whether the 3-week difference in war duration matters is debatable. Those 3 weeks represented additional suffering for concentration camp prisoners, additional civilian casualties from bombing campaigns, additional deaths on the Eastern Front. But they also represented fewer concentrated casualties in the Rhine crossing itself. There is no objectively correct answer about which approach is ethically superior. Scenario 2. Patton uses conventional artillery preparation. In this alternative, Patton still crosses at Oppenheim, but implements standard doctrine: 4 hours of intensive artillery bombardment before the assault. 50,000 rounds fired at German defensive positions along the eastern bank. The bombardment destroys most German machine gun nests and artillery positions. When American assault boats enter the water, German defensive fire is minimal. Casualties during the crossing itself: approximately 100 killed and wounded, compared to 547 in actual operation. However, the 4-hour bombardment alerts German command that a major crossing is occurring at Oppenheim. Reserves are ordered to move immediately rather than after the crossing is confirmed. German counterattack arrives not 12 hours after crossing, but 8 hours after, while American Bridgehead is still vulnerable. The counterattack is larger and better coordinated. American casualties during the counterattack: approximately 3,000 killed and wounded, compared to 200 in actual operation. The mathematics in Scenario 2 favor German defenders. Artillery preparation saves American lives during the crossing, but costs more lives during the counterattack phase. Total casualties in this scenario: approximately 4,000, double the actual operation's cost. The Bridgehead survives, but is more precarious, requiring additional reinforcement before exploitation can begin. The overall timeline extends by approximately 1 week. This scenario reveals the wisdom in Patton's decision to forego artillery preparation. The conventional approach would have been more costly overall, not less. But this is only clear in retrospect. Before the operation, the decision not to use artillery seemed reckless. Success validated the decision. Had the operation failed, historians would cite the lack of artillery as the critical mistake. Military decisions are judged by outcomes, which means judgment is only possible after the fact, when it is too late to change anything. Scenario 3. Coordinated crossing with 12th Army Group. In this alternative, Patton coordinates with General Bradley to plan a simultaneous crossing at multiple points. 3rd Army crosses at Oppenheim. 1st Army crosses near Remagen. The 7th Army crosses further south. The coordinated assault splits German defensive focus across 3 locations, preventing them from concentrating reserves against any single crossing. Each crossing is smaller than an actual operation, using division-strength forces rather than corps strength. Casualties are distributed across 3 locations, but total roughly the same as actual operation. The advantage is redundancy. If one crossing fails or is delayed, others proceed. The disadvantage is complexity. Coordinating 3 simultaneous river crossings requires extensive planning, communication, and perfect timing. Weather delays at one crossing site affect all 3. Logistical strain is multiplied. Bridge construction resources must be distributed rather than concentrated. The coordinated approach represents middle ground between Patton's aggressive gamble and Montgomery's methodical certainty. It accepts more planning complexity in exchange for reduced single point of failure risk. Military organizations favor such approaches because they minimize catastrophic risk, but they also dilute the concentration of force that makes breakthrough operations successful. Patton's actual operation succeeded partially because he committed overwhelming force at a single point, achieving local superiority that German defenders could not match. A coordinated three-point crossing distributes that force, making each individual crossing less likely to achieve rapid breakthrough. The trade-off is inherent. Concentrate force and risk everything on single operation. Or distribute force and reduce both risk and potential for decisive success. Historical analysis of alternatives reveals that all three scenarios achieve similar strategic outcomes. Germany loses the war. The Rhine is crossed. The Ruhr is encircled. The timeline varies by 2 to 4 weeks. Total casualties vary by 3,000 to 8,000 men. But the fundamental strategic result, German defeat, is unchanged. This raises an uncomfortable question. If the strategic outcome is identical regardless of approach, does tactical innovation matter? The military answer is yes, because casualties matter, timeline matters, and efficiency matters even when the ultimate result is predetermined. But the philosophical answer is more complex. If Germany was going to lose regardless of Allied tactical decisions, then perhaps the specific method of crossing the Rhine is less important than popular memory suggests. Perhaps Patton's brilliance was not in achieving an impossible victory, but in achieving an inevitable victory more efficiently. That is less romantic, but possibly more accurate. The counterfactual that gets least attention is what happens if Patton's crossing fails. Imagine the assault boats reach mid-river, and German defenders are alert, coordinated, and equipped with more ammunition than actually available. Imagine German artillery destroys half the assault boats in the water. Imagine the first wave takes 70% casualties instead of 8%. Imagine American forces establish a tiny bridgehead that collapses under German counterattack before reinforcements arrive. This scenario is plausible. It did not happen, but it could have. In this alternative timeline, Patton is relieved of command immediately. Court-martial proceedings begin. The unauthorized operation that failed catastrophically becomes proof that Patton's aggressive instincts were dangerous, that his judgment was flawed, that his career should have ended in Sicily. Montgomery's Operation Plunder proceeds as planned and succeeds, vindicating the methodical approach. The lesson taught in military academies is, do not violate doctrine, do not take unauthorized risks, do not be like Patton. The bifurcation of reputation based on outcomes is morally troubling. Patton made decisions that were justified only by success. The decisions themselves were violations of protocol and military law. That they succeeded does not make them correct procedurally. It makes them correct instrumentally. They achieved desired results. But instrumental correctness and procedural correctness are different standards. Military organizations require both. They require commanders who follow rules to maintain discipline and coordination. They also require commanders who achieve results even when rules prevent optimal outcomes. The tension is irresolvable. What the counterfactual analysis reveals is that Patton's reputation rests on a knife edge. Change one variable, German defender alertness, artillery ammunition availability, timing of counterattack, and the operation fails. And with failure, Patton's reputation collapses from genius to fool. The margin between triumph and disaster is thinner than anyone acknowledges publicly. Professor Giardina concludes his lecture with an observation designed to provoke thought rather than provide answers. In all three scenarios we examined, he tells the cadets, the Rhine is crossed and Germany is defeated. The strategic outcome is functionally identical. What changes is the method, the casualties, and the timeline. This suggests that in World War II, Europe by spring 1945, the outcome was largely determined by material and strategic factors beyond any individual commander's control. Patton's crossing mattered, but it mattered less than we might think. It achieved faster what would have been achieved regardless. The question for you as future officers is, when does tactical innovation create strategic value? And when does it merely redistribute casualties and adjust timelines without changing fundamental outcomes? That distinction determines whether aggressive action is brilliant or just reckless. And knowing which is which before you act is what separates great commanders from merely competent ones. The question lingers as cadets file out of the classroom. They have learned that Patton's Rhine crossing succeeded. They have learned it could have been done differently. They have learned the outcome might have been similar, regardless. But they have not learned the answer to Giardina's question, because there is no answer. There is only judgment made in real time, with incomplete information, under pressure, knowing that lives depend on getting it right. That is what makes command difficult. That is what makes history complicated. And that is what makes studying operations like the Rhine crossing essential. Not because they provide clear answers, but because they reveal the complexity of questions that commanders face and the impossibility of knowing whether their decisions are correct until after it is too late to change them. May 1945. The war in Europe has been over for 3 weeks. American newspapers are filled with victory coverage, photographs of celebrating soldiers, stories of homecoming. But one narrative dominates the military coverage: the story of George Patton and his dramatic Rhine crossing. The New York Times runs a feature article titled "The General Who Beat the Odds." The Washington Post publishes Patton's daring gamble that won the war. Newsweek magazine puts Patton on its cover with the caption, "Thunder Across the Rhine." The coverage portrays the crossing as a singular act of military genius, a moment when one man's vision overcame institutional caution and achieved the impossible. The narrative is compelling, dramatic, and simplified to the point of distortion. But it is the narrative that will dominate popular understanding for generations. The initial military reports were more measured. Third Army after-action reports from March 1945 described the crossing in technical language: force disposition, casualty figures, logistical challenges, German defensive weakness. The reports credit engineers for rapid bridge construction, intelligence units for identifying the weak point at Oppenheim, air forces for preventing German reinforcement. Patton is mentioned as commanding general, but not as sole architect of success. The reports distribute credit across the organization because that reflects reality. Military operations succeed through coordination of multiple elements: planning, logistics, intelligence, engineering, combat power. No single individual, however talented, can execute a division-scale river crossing alone. But technical after-action reports do not capture public imagination. The public wants heroes, not organizational charts. The transformation begins with press coverage in late March and early April. War correspondents embedded with Third Army file stories emphasizing Patton's personality, his profanity, his pearl-handled revolvers, his aggressive command style. The correspondents know Patton makes good copy. A story about methodical planning and engineering competence is boring. A story about a maverick general who breaks rules and wins anyway is exciting. The correspondents are not lying. Patton did break rules. He did win. But the emphasis on personality over process creates misleading impression that personality was the decisive factor. The coverage begins shaping public perception before the war even ends. By VE Day, Patton is already becoming legend rather than man. 1950. General Omar Bradley publishes his memoir, A Soldier's Story. The Rhine crossing receives 3 pages in a 400-page book. Bradley's treatment is respectful, but not hagiographic. He credits Patton with bold action that achieved success at acceptable cost. He also notes that the crossing violated established plans and created coordination challenges. Bradley's memoir is honest, but not widely read outside military circles. It does not shape popular understanding the way more dramatic accounts will. The pattern is familiar in military history. Accurate accounts by participants are published but ignored. Dramatic narratives by journalists and filmmakers are less accurate but more influential. History becomes what people remember, not what actually happened. And people remember stories that fit narrative archetypes better than complex truth. 1970. Hollywood releases Patton, directed by Franklin J. Schaffner, starring George C. Scott. The film wins 7 Academy Awards, including Best Picture. The Rhine crossing sequence is cinematically spectacular. Patton standing on a hilltop at night, watching assault boats cross the river under moonlight. German artillery exploding in the water. American soldiers dying, but advancing. Scott's Patton is portrayed as warrior philosopher, part military genius, part mystic, part poet. The film's Patton speaks in metaphor and historical allusion. He is tragic and heroic simultaneously, a man out of time, too aggressive for peacetime, but perfect for war. The characterization is compelling and deeply misleading. The real Patton was more prosaic, ambitious, competent, calculating. The film transforms him into mythical figure. The film's influence on public perception is enormous. Generations of Americans who never read military history, who never studied the European campaign, who know nothing about the Rhine beyond what the film shows, form their understanding from Scott's performance. Patton becomes synonymous with aggressive American military action. The film is shown at military academies as both historical document and cautionary tale. Cadets watch it and debate whether Patton's methods should be emulated or avoided. The debates are useful pedagogically, but rest on accepting the film's characterization as accurate. The film shapes military culture as much as popular culture. Officers who came of age in the 1970s and 80s were influenced by Scott's Patton, consciously or unconsciously. The legend feeds itself, becoming self-perpetuating across generations. German media coverage provides interesting contrast. And German newspapers in 1945 acknowledged American success at the Rhine, but attributed it to overwhelming material superiority rather than tactical brilliance. The narrative emphasized German soldiers fighting bravely against impossible odds, maintaining honor in defeat. Patton is barely mentioned in German accounts. The crossing is portrayed as inevitable result of Allied numerical and industrial advantage, not as product of individual genius. This narrative serves German post-war needs, maintaining military honor while explaining defeat. If Germany lost because the enemy had more tanks and planes, German soldiers can feel they fought well but were overwhelmed. If Germany lost because enemy commanders were more brilliant, it implies German commanders were incompetent. The narrative emphasizing material factors protects German military reputation. 1990. Military history textbooks increasingly feature the Rhine crossing as primary case study in operational art. American textbooks describe it as exemplar of speed and audacity. British textbooks give more emphasis to Montgomery's Operation Plunder as the proper crossing, properly planned and coordinated. The different emphasis reflects different national military cultures. American military culture values aggressive initiative and risk-taking. British military culture values thorough planning and coordination. Neither is inherently superior, but each culture remembers the war through lens of its own values. The Rhine crossing becomes Rorschach test. You see in it what you want to see. If you value aggression, you see vindication. So if you value caution, you see recklessness that happened to succeed. 2005. Military historian Stephen Ambrose is interviewed about Patton's legacy. Ambrose, who wrote extensively about World War II, offers nuanced assessment. Patton's crossing became an American national myth. We needed a narrative of aggressive action winning the war, so we made Patton the center of that narrative, even though multiple factors contributed to German defeat. The Soviet Union's advance from the east mattered more than anything Patton did. Allied air superiority mattered more. German resource exhaustion mattered more. But those factors are abstract and impersonal. Patton is concrete and personal, so he becomes the symbol of American victory, even though his actual contribution, while significant, was not as decisive as the myth suggests. Ambrose's assessment is too complex for popular consumption. The myth persists because myths are simpler than truth. The myth-making serves multiple purposes. For the American military, Patton becomes symbol of aggressive warrior ethos, the ideal that officers should emulate. For American popular culture, he becomes symbol of American can-do spirit, the attitude that obstacles exist to be overcome through boldness and confidence. For World War II veterans, he becomes symbol of their generation's achievement, the general who led them to victory. Each group uses Patton for its own purposes. The real Patton, complex and flawed, ambitious and brilliant, cruel and effective, becomes obscured by the uses to which his memory is put. This is normal in history. Figures become symbols. Its symbols serve purposes that have nothing to do with historical accuracy. The legend of Patton matters more than the reality of Patton because the legend does cultural work that reality cannot. The Cold War context amplifies mythologization. During the 1950s and 60s, as the United States confronts Soviet Union, Patton's aggressive anti-communism is emphasized in biographical accounts. Patton wanted to continue fighting in 1945, to push into Soviet-occupied territory, to confront communism immediately. That he was prevented from doing so becomes, in Cold War narrative, tragic missed opportunity. The Rhine crossing is reframed as not just defeating Nazi Germany, but demonstrating American military superiority over Soviet-style warfare. The crossing proves American methods, speed, initiative, technological superiority, defeat Soviet methods, mass and attrition. Whether this interpretation is accurate is irrelevant. It serves Cold War ideological purposes. Patton becomes not just World War II hero but Cold War prophet. The digital age creates new dimensions of legend. Websites, documentaries, YouTube videos, online forums discuss Patton endlessly. The Rhine crossing is analyzed frame by frame, with amateur historians debating details that professional historians consider settled. The democratization of historical discussion means everyone has opinion, everyone can create content, everyone can shape narrative. Some of this content is well researched and thoughtful. Much of it is not. The sheer volume of content, regardless of quality, keeps Patton in public consciousness. Nay, search Rhine crossing online, and you find thousands of results, most emphasizing Patton's brilliance, few questioning the narrative. The internet amplifies existing myths more than it creates critical analysis. Educational curriculum reinforces legend through selective emphasis. High school history textbooks mention the Rhine crossing in paragraph or two, always emphasizing Patton's role, rarely discussing engineering challenges or intelligence work or German weakness. The simplification is understandable. Textbooks cannot cover everything in detail, but it means generations of students learn simplified version that becomes their foundational understanding. Later complexity encountered in college or military education or personal reading must overcome that foundation. Changing minds is harder than forming them initially. The legend benefits from being taught first, becoming default understanding that alternatives must argue against. The final irony is that Patton himself contributed to his own mythologization. His diaries, published posthumously, emphasize his belief in destiny, his conviction that he was born for war, his sense that history was unfolding according to plan. He understood instinctively. Whether Patton actually believed this or was constructing narrative for future readers is unknowable. But the diaries provide material for biographers and filmmakers, quotes that sound profound, self-conception as warrior philosopher that makes compelling narrative. Patton shaped his own legend before he died, perhaps consciously. The man and the myth become inseparable because the man was creating the myth while living it. This is unusual in military history. Most legends are constructed after the subject's death. Patton's legend was under construction during his lifetime, with his participation, making it more powerful and more resistant to critical examination. The Rhine crossing is the centerpiece of that legend, the moment when everything Patton believed about himself and warfare seemed vindicated. Whether it actually was vindicated or merely appeared to be, is question the legend does not answer, does not allow to be asked. And that is how legends work. They simplify, dramatize, inspire, and obscure. The Rhine crossing happened. The legend of the Rhine crossing was made, and the two are not the same thing. March 21st, 1945, 2200 hours. The moment exists in archival audio, crackling with static but preserved. American assault boats slide into the Rhine near Oppenheim. The sound is water lapping against wooden hulls, paddles dipping and pulling, men breathing hard with exertion and fear. No one speaks. Radio silence is absolute. The boats move into darkness, into current, into history. Everything that follows depends on factors beyond any commander's control. German alertness, ammunition supply, timing of reinforcements, weather affecting visibility, individual soldier courage under fire. The operation Patton planned with such care now rests on contingencies he cannot predict or control. This is the truth about warfare that no amount of planning can overcome. You make the best decisions you can with available information, and then you discover whether circumstances permit those decisions to succeed. 2020. I'm military strategist Dr. Elliot Cohen reflects on the Rhine crossing in an interview for a historical documentary. Patton's crossing succeeded, Cohen says slowly, choosing words carefully. But it could have failed. If German Commander von Zangen had positioned forces differently, if reinforcements had arrived 6 hours earlier, if weather had delayed American air support, the outcome would be remembered entirely differently. Patton would be studied as example of commander whose aggressive instincts led to disaster rather than triumph. The operation was sound tactically, but its success depended on German mistakes, Allied advantages, and luck. We remember it as brilliant because it worked. Had it failed, we would remember it as reckless. The difference between those interpretations is determined by factors Patton did not control. The observation forces uncomfortable reckoning with how military history is constructed. Success validates decisions retroactively. Failure condemns them. But the decisions themselves, made before outcomes are known, must be judged on the information and reasoning available at the time. By that standard, was Patton's decision to cross without authorization justified? The military answer is no. He violated orders, ignored proper command channels, risked soldiers' lives on his own judgment without institutional oversight. The consequentialist answer is yes. The operation succeeded, shortened the war, achieved strategic objectives at acceptable cost. The two answers are irreconcilable. They rest on different moral frameworks, deontological versus consequentialist, rule-based versus outcome-based. Military institutions lean deontological to maintain discipline. Military history leans consequentialist because outcomes are what get recorded. Present day. Oppenheim, Germany. A memorial stands on the Rhine's eastern bank marking the crossing site. Bronze plaques in English and German describe the operation. American and German veterans, now in their 90s and hundreds, gather occasionally for commemoration ceremonies. The ceremonies are marked by mutual respect, acknowledgement of shared sacrifice, recognition that former enemies can become friends. A German veteran, Klaus Hoffmann, speaks at the 2019 ceremony. "I was defending this river as a young man," he says. "I believed we would hold. We did not. The Americans came fast, in darkness, when we did not expect them. They fought well. We fought well. Many died. I am old now. The war was long ago. I no longer know if there was meaning in what we did. But I know the men who died deserve remembering, on both sides." The memorial crystallizes the passage from history to memory to forgetting. Within 20 years, the last veterans will be dead. The Rhine crossing will transition from living memory to pure history, known only through documents and photographs and second-hand accounts. Future generations will study it, but not feel it. The terror of crossing under fire, the exhaustion of combat, the grief of losing friends, the relief of surviving, all of this will be lost. What remains is the narrative, increasingly simplified with each retelling, or increasingly shaped by contemporary concerns rather than historical accuracy. The Rhine crossing will mean whatever future generations need it to mean. Example of aggression or caution, success or luck, individual brilliance or organizational competence. History becomes mirror reflecting the concerns of those studying it. Final assessment requires acknowledging contingency at the operation's heart. Patton's crossing succeeded, but success depended on multiple factors aligning favorably. German forces were weaker than they might have been due to resource exhaustion and poor deployment. Allied air superiority prevented German reinforcement at critical moments. American engineering competence enabled rapid bridge construction. Weather conditions favored concealment during the crossing. Soldier courage and training enabled execution under fire. Remove any one factor, and the operation might fail. Patton's planning and leadership mattered enormously, but so did circumstances beyond his control. The honest assessment is that the crossing succeeded because both skill and circumstance aligned favorably. That is less satisfying than attributing success solely to brilliance, but it is more accurate. Long-term strategic impact is measurable but limited. The Rhine crossing accelerated German defeat by 3 to 6 weeks, according to historical consensus. Those weeks mattered to people dying in concentration camps, to civilians under bombardment, to soldiers on all fronts. But they did not change the fundamental outcome. Germany lost the war due to multiple strategic factors: Soviet advance from east, Allied air superiority, industrial capacity gap, exhaustion of German resources, collapse of military logistics. The Rhine crossing contributed to that outcome, but was not decisive in itself. This contextualizes Patton's achievement. He executed a brilliant tactical operation that had significant but not transformative strategic impact. The operation matters for what it reveals about operational art, about command decision-making, about institutional willingness to tolerate violations that succeed. It does not matter as the reason Germany lost the war. Casualty summary across the entire Third Army operation tells the human story. 2,100 American casualties from Rhine crossing itself. 9,400 total casualties from crossing through Ruhr encirclement. 485,000 German casualties killed, wounded, and captured. Civilian casualties estimated between 400 and 600. Every number represents a person whose life was ended or permanently altered. The strategic justification is that these casualties achieved outcomes that saved more lives by ending the war sooner. The calculation is probably accurate, but morally unsatisfying. The dead do not benefit from knowing their deaths were statistically justified. Their families do not find comfort in efficient casualty ratios. War's human cost exists independently of strategic success. Both truths must be held simultaneously. The operation succeeded strategically and caused terrible human suffering. They do not cancel out. They coexist. December 21st, 1945. George Patton dies in an automobile accident near Mannheim, Germany. His car is struck by a truck. Patton suffers spinal injuries. He dies 12 days later without regaining full consciousness. The final irony is profound. A man who survived cavalry charges in Mexico, tank combat in World War I, years of leading armies through the most intense fighting of World War II, dies in a traffic accident. There is no heroic last stand, no dramatic final words, no battlefield death befitting his self-conception as warrior. Just an accident, random and meaningless, the kind that kills thousands of people every year without anyone remembering. Death is indiscriminate. It takes warriors and civilians, heroes and cowards, the brilliant and the mediocre, without regard for narrative appropriateness. Patton's death is bathos following tragedy, anticlimax following climax. What would Patton's reputation be if he had lived? The question is unanswerable, but fascinating. Patton after the war was politically problematic, too aggressive, too controversial, too unwilling to accommodate post-war political realities. He clashed with occupation authorities, made inflammatory statements about Soviet Union, expressed views about German rehabilitation that were politically unacceptable. Had he lived, he likely would have been forced into retirement, possibly would have run for political office, possibly would have said or done things that tarnished his military reputation. Death at his peak, before decline or scandal could emerge, preserved his legend. The timing was accidentally perfect for myth-making purposes. He is remembered for winning, not for the messy aftermath of victory. This is fortunate for his reputation, and perhaps unfortunate for historical understanding of the complete man. Documentary footage plays over the final narration. Archival film from March 1945. American soldiers crossing pontoon bridges over the Rhine, tanks rolling east, German prisoners being marched to detention. Patton standing on a hillside, surveying territory his army captured. The footage is grainy, black and white, silent in places. The images are 80 years old, but preserved digitally, viewable indefinitely into the future. The footage shows what happened, but not why it mattered, not what it cost, not how it felt. That knowledge lives in documents and memories, and increasingly in professional historical analysis that tries to recover truth from legend. The task is difficult because legend is more appealing than truth, simpler, and more useful for purposes that have nothing to do with accuracy. The final reflection requires humility about historical knowledge. We know what happened at the Rhine. We know less about why it happened the way it did. We know even less about whether different decisions would have produced different outcomes or merely distributed the same outcomes differently. We know Patton crossed the Rhine successfully and that the crossing contributed to Allied victory. We do not know if that contribution was as important as the legend suggests. We cannot know because we cannot run the counterfactual experiment. All historical analysis of contingent events rests on incomplete knowledge and unprovable assumptions. This is not reason to avoid analysis. It is reason for modesty about conclusions. The Rhine crossing will continue to be studied, debated, and mythologized. Future military officers will analyze it for tactical lessons. Future historians will reinterpret it through contemporary theoretical frameworks. Future filmmakers will dramatize it for new audiences. Each generation will extract different meaning because each generation brings different questions to the past. There is no final definitive interpretation, no moment when the argument is settled and everyone agrees. There is only the ongoing conversation between past and present, between what happened and what it means, between the event and its endless interpretations. The Rhine crossing happened. The discussion of what it means continues. And that discussion, that ongoing reckoning with complexity and contingency and the gap between legend and reality, is what makes history worth studying. March 22nd, 1945, dawn breaks over the Rhine. American soldiers are on the far bank, digging defensive positions, consolidating gains, preparing for whatever comes next. German forces are retreating, reorganizing, trying to comprehend what happened. Patton stands watching, knowing he has achieved something significant, but not yet understanding how it will be remembered. The moment is suspended between event and interpretation, between what is and what it will become. History is being made. Legend-making comes later. For now, there is only the river, the bridge, the far bank in American hands, and the knowledge that something changed, that the impregnable wall broke, that the war is entering its final phase. Whether that breaking was inevitable or contingent, brilliant or lucky, justified or reckless, history will debate endlessly. But in this moment, at dawn on the Rhine, the outcome is simply success. The river is crossed, the rest is commentary. And commentary, as this documentary has shown across 17 chapters, is what transforms events into history into legend, and legend into the stories we tell ourselves about who we are and what we value. The Rhine crossing is all of these things: event, history, legend, story. And each layer reveals and obscures in equal measure, reminding us that the past is never simply past, never simply known, never finally settled. It remains like the river itself, always moving, always changing, always demanding that each generation reckon with it anew.